Chapter 1. The Sleeping Tyrant. Konoha Year 31. Class 3A was eerily silent, the sunlight making the chalk dust drift lazily in the air. At the back of the classroom, by the window in the so-called protagonist's seat, 8-year-old Kamiyama Ryo was fast asleep. His chin was pressed firmly against the desk, as if glued there. His eyelids were too heavy to lift, and his entire being radiated, "I'm done, I'm exhausted, just let me sleep." The afternoon sun shone on his strikingly red hair, but it failed to wake him. At the front of the classroom came a few stifled giggles, like the buzzing of mosquitoes. Ryo rubbed his face against the desk in irritation, which only made the sharp lines of his jaw stand out more. Just then, the teacher, Kimura Shu, pushed open the door, bringing in a little girl. Her red hair blazed like fire, framing a small, round, and rather cute face. "Quiet down, class." Kimura Shu's voice broke through the drowsy air in the back. "We have a new student joining us today." He gestured for the red-haired girl to step forward. The girl took a deep breath, then shouted bravely, "Hello, everyone. I'm Uzumaki Kushina, TTE Bane." Her voice was crisp, but the strange, rolled-tongue verbal tick at the end stood out clearly. That single shout stirred up a hornet's nest. The entire class burst into laughter. "Ha ha ha. Look at that hair. It's as red as a tomato. Hey, her face is all red now, she looks even more like one." The jeers poured down without mercy. Kushina felt like a stone sinking into mud, sinking deeper and deeper. Her throat tightened. She blinked furiously, trying to hold back tears. But no matter what, they welled up, and her vision blurred. No, she couldn't just take it. She suddenly looked up and, with a desperate shout, declared, "My dream is to become the first female Hokage of Konoha village." That was like pouring oil on the fire. The laughter grew louder, full of mockery. "Ha ha ha, she's insane. An outsider, a red tomato, wants to be Hokage. Go back to your countryside home. Daydreamer. You don't deserve it." The words stabbed her like thorny knives. Kushina's face burned hot, she couldn't tell if it was from shame or anger. This time, she couldn't hold back her tears. She threw her head back hard, trying to stop them from falling. Kimura Shu frowned, about to speak, but his voice was swallowed by the uproar. Minato Namikaze, sitting near the podium, couldn't stand it anymore. Seeing Kushina's eyes turn red, determination surged in him. His hands braced on the desk, fingers turning white, ready to stand and defend her. But then, "Shut up." The roar, like a thunderclap, drowned out everything. "You're too damn loud. Are you tired of living?" The classroom instantly froze. All laughter, all mockery, all whispers vanished as though their throats had been seized. Every eye, filled with shock and disbelief, swish, turned to the back by the window. A living nightmare had awakened. Ryo was awake. He lifted his head from the desk with a sharp crack of his neck that echoed in the dead silence. He opened his eyelids, revealing silver-gray eyes filled only with irritation at being woken in a fierce, cutting intensity as they swept across the class. Those caught in his gaze felt as though a cold wind had sliced through them. The loudest laughers from earlier shrank their necks, not daring to breathe. Oh no. They had been so busy mocking the new red-haired girl that they forgot the truly terrifying redhead in this class. Ryo's red hair, to them, was a warning sign, a symbol of violence. He was absolutely not someone to provoke. Why? Because when he first entered the academy at 6, his red hair had drawn the same mockery and bullying. His family was poor and without backing, his parents gone, leaving only a few distant and insignificant Senju relatives. However, Ryo had a cheat with a somewhat cliché name, the strongest legacy system. Likely due to his red hair, it first granted him the legacy of Red-Haired Shanks, the Yonko from the One Piece world. After the system's modification, Ryo inherited Shanks's physique. Even as a child, he became abnormally strong, with passive skills like massive stamina and rapid regeneration, a blend of Shanks's traits and Senju blood, plus 30% of Shanks's combat experience and techniques. As Ryo grew, the system would gradually unlock more, until he inherited everything Shanks possessed. Note: 30% equals Jonin, 30-60% equals Jonin Cage, 60-80% equals Cage Super Cage, 80-100% equals Super Cage. System condition. Next stage unlocks only when Ryo fully digests the current inheritance and his body is strong enough. Moreover, Ryo was inherently ruthless and extremely hardworking. The result went without saying. At the academy, whether it was seniors bullying juniors or classmates joining in mockery, Anyone who dared insult his red hair was persuaded, physically by his fists. The words, "Don't leave after school," were no joke when coming from him, they struck fear in everyone's heart. Could the teachers control him? The truth was, most of them, after weighing their own strength, weren't even sure they could subdue this ferocious little monster. With this fearsome reputation, Ryo reigned at the top of Class 3A, no, the entire academy. For 3 years, everyone lived under his shadow, miserable. All knew that once this red-haired boy, who loved to sleep, opened his eyes, he was a human Trex. So, his single low growl of morning temper was enough, the class instantly went silent. Kushina was completely bewildered. What had just happened? HMPH. Boring. Ryo saw the cowards shrink like quails and his irritation faded slightly. He glared around the room, his gaze like a blade scraping across faces, full of warning, make another sound. I'll show you what happens when you interrupt my sleep. Satisfied, Ryo slammed his head back onto the desk with a thud, sticking himself there once more. In short, even if the world ended, no one was allowed to disturb Ryo's sleep. As for why he was always so sleepy, he couldn't help it. Ryo was just an ordinary poor kid in Konoha. His ancestors were once Senju, but ever since the second Hokage, Tobirama Senju, disbanded the clan and everyone gave up the surname, by Ryo's parents' generation, almost nothing was left. His parents died early, leaving only a rundown house where heavy rain outside meant rain inside as well. Plus a few cheap-sounding crank ninjutsu scrolls, forget about anything like Kage Bunshin, and meager savings that weren't even enough to pick his teeth. And worse, Ryo's body. He had inherited the iron-blooded physique of Shanks. His appetite was bottomless. How long could his parents' pitiful inheritance last? It was gone in an instant. On top of that, Ryo trained like a maniac. So at night, after training, he had to sneak to the outskirts of the forest of death to hunt for food, wild rabbits, fruits, wild boars, anything edible. For 2 years of school, this was his routine. The result, class in the daytime was his only recharge time. That's why his temper was so bad. Being woken from deep sleep. Morning grumpiness, max. Vaguely, he thought he heard someone mocking his red hair again. Unforgivable. Ryo's mental blacklist was already noting down names. Damn it, wait until after school. Let's see how I deal with you clueless brats. As for the new student. What new student? His eyelids weighed a ton, his brain hadn't left deep sleep mode, so he hadn't even noticed an extra person at the front of the room, let alone who it was. The classroom air froze solid. Seeing the terrifying redhead flop back down and resume snoring, everyone let out an extremely quiet, relieved breath, as though surviving a disaster. Shish, softer. Don't wake him again. The students even held their breath, terrified of disturbing the sleeping volcano again. The ones who had mocked Kushina earlier were drenched in cold sweat. Had Ryo heard them insulting red hair? If so, they were doomed. Kushina-chan, the teacher at the podium sighed in relief, lowering his voice unconsciously as if meeting someone in secret. Find yourself a seat. Kushina still had a faint blush of anger on her cheeks, her light blue eyes misty. She looked around, clutching the hem of her clothes nervously. Empty. 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 The only empty seat was next to that terrifying red-haired boy. Under the whole class's sympathetic and gloating eyes, as if watching someone march to their death, Kushina gathered her courage. Step by step, she moved softly to the window seat. Her heart pounded like a drum. She carefully pulled out the chair, making almost no sound, then quickly sat like a little rabbit. Ahem, all right, class, let's continue the lesson. The teacher cleared his throat, still barely louder than a mosquito, and hurriedly resumed lecturing to divert attention. Kushina quietly turned her head to observe the boy beside her, his flamered hair buried in his arms as he slept soundly. Although he had been terrifying just now, his eyes as sharp as knives, he had helped her, hadn't he? Everyone mocked and isolated her, but he hadn't joined them. And he had the same red hair as her. Kushina remembered Grandma Mito's gentle words, make lots of friends at school. Her small fist clenched under the desk, cheering herself on. Yes. Isn't this her chance to make her first friend? He's the one. Kushina summoned the greatest courage of her life, cheeks flushing again. She leaned slightly toward Ryo, voice soft and timid, full of 12,000% anticipation. She whispered to the red-haired boy with his head buried in his arms, hello. My name is Uzumaki Kushina. Can we be friends? After her words fell, only the teacher's low lecture and the occasional shhk of chalk on the board could be heard. Kushina held her breath, waiting. Nervous. Excited. Both. 1 second, 2 seconds. His reply, who, snore, who. Soft, steady snores rose from the red-haired boy's head. Kushina. Her expression froze. Her blue eyes blinked, then blinked again, staring at the unresponsive sleeper. At that moment, Kushina felt as though a tomato had hit her on the head, dull, sour, and embarrassing. Her first attempt to make a friend, defeated by snoring. Her balloon of courage went poof, completely deflated. To be continued. Chapter 2. The Straight Man and the Fiery Girl. Dingalingaling. Oh, thank heavens. The dismissal bell was practically the sound of angels. Their teacher, Kimura Shu, almost instantly clapped his lesson plan shut. Before he could even finish his sentence, the small group of kids who had laughed the loudest and shouted the cruelest words earlier jumped up from their seats as if springs had gone off under them, shooting up with a whoosh. They moved so fast, it was like a pack of starving wild dogs was chasing them. Scrambling and stumbling, they didn't even have time to put their backpacks on properly, rushing out the classroom door with a clatter, stirring up a gust of wind that sent chalk dust flying from the podium. Why were they running so fast? Obviously. They knew perfectly well that when they mocked the new red-haired student earlier, their voices were as loudspeakers. The problem was, the words, red-haired. There were only 2 redheads in the room. One was the new, tomato-headed girl, easy to bully. The other, was sleeping by the window, the one whose name alone was enough to make Ninja Academy students break into a cold sweat, Kamiyama Ryo. They hadn't forgotten the look in Ryo's eyes when he woke up, saying, "You're too damn loud. Are you tired of living?" That gaze was as cold as a blade scraping bone. It had stunned them with fear at the time, and thinking about it now still made their hair stand on end. Shouldn't they get out of here as fast as possible? Were they supposed to stay and wait until the red-haired tyrant fully woke up, remembered everything, and then gave them a loving greeting on the way home? Remembering the miserable state of those who had been greeted by Ryo's fists in the past. Forget it. Running faster might just save their lives. Yawn. In the last row by the window, the red-haired boy who had been sleeping soundly finally stirred. Ryo stretched and let out a long yawn, his bones popping. That nap was truly comfortable. All the irritation from earlier had completely vanished. After a full rest, he felt refreshed. The fierce, menacing look on his face was gone, his brows relaxed. Coupled with his undeniably handsome features, he gave off a strangely gentle impression. There was no helping it. Ryo was at his core a grinder, not some natural-born killer. As a good young man who had grown up in a relatively peaceful environment in his previous life, he didn't have twisted thoughts. He just had a bad temper, extreme morning grumpiness, and slightly stronger than average fists. After a good sleep, he was like a fully charged battery, calm and steady. Ryo rubbed his eyes, ready to grab his bag and head home to feed his bottomless stomach and then plan his evening training regimen. "You're awake." A clear voice suddenly came from beside him, carrying a trace of resentment. Ryo was startled. Only then did he realize that the desk next to him, which had always been empty, now had someone sitting there. A little girl, with the same fiery red hair as his own. Her round, cute face was staring at him with light blue eyes, her small mouth slightly pouted. "You are." Ryo hadn't registered it yet. He had just woken up, and his mind was still fuzzy. All that filled his head were the words, "School's out, hungry, eat, train." Kushina looked at Ryo's confused expression, and the frustration in her heart surged again. She remembered earlier, when she had bravely and nervously asked, "Let's be friends," and his response had been nothing but steady snoring. Even more frustrating. She took a deep breath, swallowed her irritation, and almost exactly repeated her actions from earlier. She stiffly introduced herself again. "Hello. My name is Uzumaki Kushina. Can we be friends?" Though her tone carried some indignation, there was still hope in her eyes. After all, this was the only one with the same red hair as her, who hadn't mocked her, and had even helped her. Ryo blinked at the pouting red-haired girl, puzzled. Oh, right. He remembered now. It seemed that when he was half asleep, the homeroom teacher, Kimura Shu, had brought in a new student. Wait, Uzumaki Kushina. Uzumaki, red hair, married a blonde guy in the future, gave birth to the child of prophecy. Naruto's mom. Now Ryo was wide awake. Oh. He quickly snapped back. The girl was waiting for his answer. "My name is Kamiyama Ryo. Hello, nice to meet you." His tone was calm, not fierce at all. Ryo wasn't actually hard to talk to. As long as you didn't insult his red hair, call him tomato head, or make noise while he was sleeping. When he was in a normal state, he wasn't unreasonable. It was just that his persuasion record with his fists over the past 2 years was too notorious, and since he only came to class to sleep, no one dared talk to him. So his keep away aura had been maintained all this time. Kushina, this fearless or clueless warrior, was the first to approach him. Seeing Ryo respond so easily in a gentle tone, the brave Kushina's temper suddenly flared. She had stared at him all afternoon just to make friends. Ryo, meanwhile, had snored the whole time. Even though his face was unfairly handsome, the more she thought about it, the angrier she became. HMPH. Kushina wrinkled her little nose. Ryokan has excellent sleep quality. Your eyelashes didn't even twitch all afternoon. I called you several times and you didn't wake up. Her tone was part complaint, part grievance, and part, you owe me. Ryo looked at her with a blank expression. What? Forgive his straight-laced mind, but he simply didn't understand why Kushina was so angry. The only thought in his mind was, school's out, time to eat. Kushina-chan, do you still need something? If not, school's out. I'm going home, Ryo said directly. To this grinder, chatting and making friends didn't compare to going home to eat and prepare for training. His evening plan of weighted running and 10,000 sword swings was waiting. Socializing with an 8-year-old girl. Please. He had no interest, nor the time. Besides, he had vaguely felt something watching him earlier, most likely related to this girl. Trouble magnets should be avoided. He had no time for romance. At least not now. This wasn't the time to chase girls, even if she was the future Hokage's mother. His only goal was to grind for strength and avoid dying as a nameless casualty in the coming Second Great Ninja War. Survive. Get stronger. That was it. HMPH. Nothing. Kushina was nearly choked by his bluntness. Her big eyes rolled fiercely, and she shouted inwardly, stupid blockhead. I took the initiative. And his attitude is this bad. Am I, Uzumaki Kushina, not cute? Ryo didn't notice her resentment. Once she said, nothing, he immediately relaxed. Alright. I've got things to do, so I'm leaving. See you tomorrow, Kushina-chan. Before he even finished, he grabbed his faded, tattered backpack. Moving quickly, he strode out the classroom door without looking back, his figure casual and carefree. Kushina watched his red hair vanish through the door, her small chest heaving with anger. She suddenly stood up, faced the door, and wrinkled her nose with all her might, letting out a loud, heartfelt protest. HMPH. Kamiyama Ryo. She would remember him. To be continued. Chapter 3. Kushina's problem. The sun slanted westward, casting a dazzling golden glow over Konoha. Kushina kicked a small stone with her foot as she trudged toward the old house in the Senju clan compound. Her vibrant red hair seemed to burn even brighter in the setting sun, but it only made the lingering traces of anger on her round, cute face more obvious. She was still sulking over Ryo. HMPH. Stupid jock. Blockhead. She kicked another stone far away, muttering under her breath. I was so proactive. Sleeping. All he does is sleep. His snores are louder than anything. The memory of her courage that afternoon made her cheeks burn again. Her heart had pounded like a drum when she walked up to him, speaking in the softest voice she'd ever managed. And what did she get in return? A loud, drawn-out, who, MMPH, from him in his sleep. When she entered the familiar courtyard, the sight of the heavy wooden door lifted her mood. A brilliant smile stretched across her face as she pushed the door open and ran inside. Grandma Mito. I'm home. Her voice was like a stone dropped into calm water. The light inside was much softer. Uzumaki Mito sat on the tatami near the courtyard with a steaming cup of tea in front of her. Time seemed to have touched only her eyes, the yin seal kept her appearance like that of a gentle maiden. Seeing Kushina rush in like a little flame, Mito's eyes curved into a smile. You're back. How was school today? Mito's voice was as gentle as a spring breeze. Did you make any new friends? She knew too well what this girl, whose clan had been destroyed and country lost, needed: acceptance, recognition, new bonds. Those were the remedies for her wounds. New friends. A spirited female voice chimed in from the side. Tsunade, with long golden hair and a tall figure, sat cross-legged, munching on senbei. Her eyes lit up at the question, and she didn't even bother brushing off the crumbs on her clothes. Beside her sat Nawaki, a little older, flipping through a basic ninjutsu book. At Kushina's words, he also looked up curiously. Tsunade put her senbei down on the low table, leaning forward like a big sister. Quick, tell me. Did anyone bully you at school? Tell your big sister, and I'll have Naoki teach them a lesson. She jabbed her elbow into him, her eyes sharp with command. Right, Naoki. Naoki almost dropped his book, rubbing his shoulder as he straightened. Right, right. Sis is right. Kushina, don't worry. If anyone dares bully you, just tell me. I'll make sure they regret ever stepping into the academy. As the eldest grandson of the Senju in this generation, it was only natural for him to protect this adorable little sister. At school, except for a few geniuses and a certain redhead, he truly feared no one. Kushina felt warmth spread in her chest as she saw their concerned eyes. Mito was her pillar, and Tsunade and Naoki were like blazing flames that melted away the chill left by the fall of the Uzumaki. She walked over to Mito's side, nestling close. The gloom on her face faded, replaced with a hint of childish charm. No, no one bullied me, she shook her head, then suddenly brightened. I just met a classmate. His hair is red, just like mine. Oh, red. Tsunade's gossiping spark immediately caught fire. She let out a meaningful, oh, and grinned mischievously, leaning forward even more. A red-haired classmate that caught your attention. Tell me, is that kid especially handsome? She deliberately emphasized, especially handsome, nudging Kushina lightly. Do you like him? Big sister Tsunade. Kushina's face flushed red like a ripe cherry tomato. She shot up from Mito's side, flustered and shy. You, what nonsense are you talking about? I don't like him at all. She stomped her foot and then immediately turned, diving into Mito's embrace, burying her burning face as she wriggled and whined, Grandma Mito. Look at big sister Tsunade. She's bullying me. Mito chuckled, swayed by Kushina's sudden dive, and gently patted her back as if she were soothing a ruffled kitten. Alright, Tsunade is just teasing you. She gave her mischievous granddaughter a warning look. Tsunade only laughed, ignoring Kushina's complaint, her grin widening as if she'd just gotten more ammo. Don't like him. Then you must hate him, right? Did that kid upset you? Her expression shifted in an instant, going from playful gossip to protective big sister. Her gaze snapped toward Naoki, sharp as a blade. Naoki. Did you hear that? Tomorrow, find that red-haired brat named Ryo and give him a proper greeting from me. Let him know what happens when someone upsets our Kushina. Ryo. Naoki, who a moment ago had been eager to play hero, froze. His smile vanished as if someone had grabbed his throat. His eyes widened in horror. Sis. You want me to die? Huh. What do you mean? Tsunade blinked, completely caught off guard by his reaction. What was so special about this kid named Ryo? Naoki swallowed, remembering the countless stories floating around, his palms sweating. Sis, you've been away from the academy for years, so it's normal you don't know. But, he stammered, his eyes full of lingering fear. That redhead, his name's Ryo. Kamiyama Ryo from Class 3A. He's the academy's infamous little tyrant. He fights like a monster, he's ridiculously strong, and he's vicious. I heard some older students tried to teach him a lesson, but he knocked their front teeth out. Even the teachers back off when he gets mad. You want me to go greet him? Forget it. I'll end up in the hospital first. The words poured out like a machine gun, and Naoki still didn't think it was enough. He added, that red hair of his is basically a danger signal in the academy. Nobody dares mess with him. Whoever does, ends up unlucky. Seriously. Naoki desperately wanted his sister to understand the situation. In short, Ryo was terrifying, and his record spoke for itself. Kushina, listening nearby, was a little stunned. Ryo. A tyrant. Even the teachers avoided him. She unconsciously recalled the cold, bloodthirsty look in his eyes when he was woken up in class. The way the entire room had gone silent instantly, it didn't seem impossible. But when school ended earlier, hadn't he seemed harmless? He just spoke stiffly. A stupid jock. HMPH. Tsunade finally dropped her playful act, her brows furrowing. That's strong, she had no impression of this Ryo. Mito, who had been gently patting Kushina's back, shifted her gaze, her eyes distant yet knowing. She spoke softly. Red hair, named Ryo, her hand stroked Kushina's soft red locks as her expression grew thoughtful. Then grandma knows who it is. To be continued. Chapter 4, Tyrannosaurus in Disguise. Uzumaki Mito paused for a moment, as if recalling the past. Back when Ryo first enrolled, because of his striking red hair, the third Hokage, Sarutobi Hiruzen, had personally visited her. At first, the Hokage thought a descendant of the Uzumaki clan had appeared in Konoha. After all, the Uzumaki clan had carried red hair for generations and was renowned as ideal vessels for ceiling-tailed beasts. But after careful investigation, it was discovered that Ryo was simply a civilian descendant of the Senju scattered throughout Konoha. His parents had died young, and he had grown up in hardship. Considering the frequent intermarriages between the Senju and the Uzumaki, with their bloodlines often intertwined, it was possible for ancestral Uzumaki traits to surface in Senju descendants. Children with such red hair naturally had strong physiques, abundant life force, and vast chakra reserves, making them prime candidates for becoming Jinchuriki of the Nine Tails. Most importantly, Ryo was a Konoha native with a clean civilian background. He belonged naturally to the Hokage's faction. He was one of their own. The third Hokage even considered grooming him to replace the aging Uzumaki Mito as the next Nine Tails Jinchuriki. So he asked Mito to personally confirm whether Ryo had awakened the Uzumaki bloodline and to evaluate his potential. Mito remembered that scene clearly. She had carefully looked at the 6-year-old boy with red hair. Silent, stubborn, wearing old clothes, but standing with a straight back. The result, however, was disappointing. Mito sensed that the chakra within Ryo's body was pitifully weak, even thinner than that of the most ordinary academy student. It did not resemble an awakened Uzumaki bloodline at all. Perhaps it's just a special hair color, without inheriting the chakra talent of the Uzumaki, Mito concluded, and she reported this to the third Hokage. Ryo was excluded from the Nine Tails Jinchuriki candidates, left as nothing more than a poor, unnoticed Senju orphan. It was precisely because of this that, after the fall of the Uzumaki, the Hokage urgently dispatched the Anbu to bring back Kushina, whose bloodline was purer and stronger, to Konoha for training. Mito's judgment had not been wrong. At that time, the original Kamiyama Ryo was indeed nothing more than an ordinary child with mediocre talent and meager chakra, destined to remain unknown in the ninja world or even to die as cannon fodder. His chakra reserves were so pitiful that he could barely perform even a simple E-rank ninjutsu. But what neither Mito nor the third Hokage could have imagined was that the Ryo who had transmigrated was no longer the same mediocre child. Soon after enrolling at the age of 6, a cheat system quietly bound itself to him. Perhaps because of his red hair, similar to the Uzumaki, the first inheritance the system granted him was from a peak figure of another world, the One Piece world's Red-Haired Shanks, one of the 4 emperors, master of the strongest conqueror's haki. The system's power completely and fundamentally transformed Ryo's body. He was granted a terrifying physique on par with Shanks in his youth. Dense muscles, tough bones, monstrous strength and stamina, fast recovery, and terrifying growth potential. Within him lay the potential for conqueror's haki, and he unlocked about 30% of Shanks' combat skills and fighting experience. This transformation even unintentionally fused with the tiny trace of life energy within his Senju bloodline. The result was today's Ryo, a small tyrannosaurus in the skin of an 8-year-old child. His health bar was ridiculously thick, his recovery astonishingly fast, and he carried the instincts of a top-tier fighter, albeit in a younger form. And his so-called thin chakra. That was just an illusion. As everyone knows, chakra is the fusion of spiritual and physical energy. With his terrifying physique nourished by Shanks' legacy, his dormant conqueror's haki, and his powerful spiritual energy as a transmigrator, Ryo was destined to become a sea of chakra in the future. Mito had only given him a brief glance, failing to see the deeper layers. That was why she had concluded his chakra was thin and without Uzumaki talent. Listening to Naoki's description of Ryo like he was some terrifying monster, seeing Mito's thoughtful look, and remembering Ryo's roar in class that silenced everyone even while half asleep, Kushina couldn't help but feel dazed. This deskmate of hers did seem really strong. But when school ended earlier, he hadn't seemed scary at all. Most of her indignation had faded, replaced by a strange mix of curiosity and lingering resentment from Ryo brushing her off earlier. Mito's soft, soothing voice pulled her back from her thoughts. So, Kushina and Ryo are in the same class, and even deskmates. She looked down at Kushina with a gentle smile. That is fate. Since you are deskmates, Kushina, get along well with him. Both of you are very special children. Get along with him, Kushina repeated, pouting again. But all he does is sleep. He barely listens when I talk to him. This afternoon, when I tried to be friends with him, he just said, if there's nothing, I'm going home. She mimicked Ryo's stiff tone, which drew laughter from Tsunade and Nawaki. Haha, such personality. Tsunade chuckled. Interesting. Kushina, looks like your path to making friends won't be smooth. Nawaki couldn't help but laugh as well, though his laugh carried more relief. Better Kushina than him dealing with that walking disaster. HMPH. I'm not talking to you guys. Kushina's cheeks turned bright red as she buried herself in Mito's arms again. The fading glow of the sunset filtered through the paper doors, bathing the room in a warm orange light. To be continued. Chapter 5. Midnight Beast Feast. Discussions about Ryo in the Senju compound were completely unknown to him, the protagonist. Right now, his stomach was rumbling with hunger, like a giant pit churning inside. This wasn't ordinary hunger. It was the kind of hunger where he felt like he could eat an entire cow. He just wanted to stuff himself. All of this was because of his body. He had inherited Shanks' monstrous physique. Even though Ryo was still a child, the more he trained, the hungrier he became. He knew that if he didn't put at least 100 catties of meat into his stomach, today's training would be wasted. Home. Just a dilapidated shack on the edge of the village, dirt poor, a pathetic contrast to his bottomless appetite. The rice jar was always empty. The most valuable thing in the entire house was a spice box against the wall. That was his lifeline. The money left behind by his parents. Already eaten long ago. Now, he lived on a monthly pension from the village. He wouldn't waste a single coin on rice or flour. Other than daily necessities, all his money went straight to the Konoha store for seasonings, big jars of coarse salt, dried chili flakes, cheap miso, animal fat, dried wild onions, and ginger blocks. Beside them were his handmade 2-meter-long skewers, wicker baskets for smoking meat, and large clean tree leaves for wrapping. This was his kitchen arsenal. The few scraps of smoked boar jerky left. Not even enough to get stuck in his teeth. He chewed them down, changed into old clothes, and under the cover of night, slipped out of the village like a shadow, heading for the forest of death. Little rabbits and birds. That kind of meat wasn't even enough to snack on. If he was going to hunt, it had to be something big. Because of the natural energy in this world, the forest of death had an abundance of oversized wild beasts. Look, a boar the size of a small hill, thick skin, bristly fur, and tusks sharp enough to gut a man. Just its bulk alone was enough to make anyone drool. Ryo didn't say a word. He didn't draw his broken katana. Instead, he grabbed a sharpened wooden club. This thing worked better against thick hides anyway. When the boar lowered its head to root around, exposing its neck, Ryo tensed his body like a drawn bow and whoosh. With his current strength and sharp eyesight, the club flew like it had eyes, stabbing straight into the weak spot of the boar's neck. A clean kill. Done. Bleeding, gutting, skinning, butchering, his movements were quick and precise. How many innocent lives had he ended to get this skilled? Dragging back half a side of meat which still weighed over 100 catties, Ryo tossed it into his backyard, slaughterhouse plus tough guy kitchen. There sat a large bluestone chopping block, a chipped cleaver, a scrap iron pot big enough to stew a whole pig, a branch barbecue grill, and piles of coarse salt, chili powder, and other spices. Rolling up his sleeves, he instantly switched into gourmet veteran mode. Swish, swish, swish. The cleaver flew, breaking the boar down, thick hindquarters. Chunk them up for stew. Ribs and legs. Slice for grilling. The tender parts. Cut into wide slabs for marinating. Earthenware basins were set out. He dumped in the sliced meat, poured in coarse salt, sprinkled chili powder and spices, drizzled oil and miso. With bark gloves on his hands, he kneaded the meat thoroughly, making sure every piece was coated. Then he wrapped them in tree leaves, tied them down with stone weights to marinate, while the extra strips were salted for air drying. The giant iron pot was filled with water. Bones and scraps went in. He tossed in handfuls of wild onions, ginger, mushrooms, and fruit he'd gathered nearby. Soon it was boiling hard, gurgle, gurgle, as the smell of broth filled the air. Those 2-meter skewers weren't just decoration. He threaded ribs and leg slices onto them and placed them on the grill, carefully controlling the distance from the fire. Fat dripped onto the coals, sizzling loudly, sending waves of aroma straight up. Ryo crouched beside the fire, flipping meat like it was his own child. The rest of the meat was hung in wicker baskets, smoking over pine needles and fruit wood. Another portion was laid on a stone slab, waiting. He wasted nothing. Even as a child, Ryo did the work of several men. Shanks' physique made it easy. He processed the 100 catties of meat without breaking a sweat. The backyard filled with smoke, fire, and the overwhelming aroma of meat, a giant's kitchen party. Hungry. Yes, starving. But in his heart, he knew eating was just fuel. Only by filling up could he keep training. Before eating, he had to take his overachiever's body training package. With a giant log strapped to his back, heavy enough to crush several men, he began weighted steps. Each stomp left a crater, sweat pouring down. 1, 2, 3. In his mind, he replayed Shanks' training, breathing, step control. He grit his teeth, pushing to his limit. When he finally dropped the log, his back was red like it had been branded, muscles twitching. He caught his breath, then drew his katana. Clang! He slashed downward. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. The sound of blades cutting air pierced the night. He didn't know how many tens of thousands of cuts he made, only that his arms eventually went numb. Leaning on the sword, panting, he felt like a dog about to collapse. Then his nose twitched. Whoa! The bone broth was bubbling into a milky white soup, steam rich with the smell of onions and mushrooms. The skewered meat turned golden, fat popping open, a charred scent rising. The smoked meat gave off the deep aroma of pine and fruit wood. The marinated raw slices carried a spicy punch. This avalanche of smells hit him like a slap. Ryo's exhausted body suddenly sprang up. The physique from the One Piece world was just that absurd. As long as he ate, his fatigue and minor injuries healed automatically. The value of this, sit-up lock health cheat, was off the charts. Indeed, the best medicine was the 100 feast laid before him. He inhaled deeply, mentally taking notes, when to add meat to the stew, which skewer needed flipping, which smoked cut needed more salt. Cook fast, feed stomach. In his past life, Ryo had been a cooking fanatic. Single for decades, all his energy went into food. Every day, he watched food bloggers, then practiced on his own, perfecting techniques to make even cheap ingredients delicious. Training himself half to death. Fine. He could endure. But disappointing his stomach. Never. If after sweating blood all day, he still ate like a pig, what was the point of living? So no matter how tired he was, he would always turn giant beast meat into something mouthwatering. That was his one stubbornness. Only by eating his fill could he keep grinding. After a short break, more training would continue through the night. As for chakra. What chakra? He had Shanks' inheritance. Even without 6 paths level cheats, he could climb to the top of the ninja world the normal way. And besides, he didn't even have access to advanced ninjutsu right now. So his chakra reserves were small, on purpose. The little he had was enough to pass school exams. Now, only when he was dead tired would he glance at his system panel, watching the assimilation progress tick forward by a tiny fraction, like sword skill unlock progress. Every bit of growth made it worth it. After his feast and some rest, he pushed himself again. By dawn, the night-long training ended. He washed up, soaked in a hot bath, and ate a hearty breakfast. Then he packed the bento he'd prepared the night before for the academy lunch, dragging his drained body to school. Daytime. That was prime time for him to lie flat and recover. To be continued. Chapter 6. Seated next to a snorer. It was early morning, and the paths of Konoha were already bustling with students hurrying to the ninja academy. But as soon as anyone in the crowd spotted that striking head of red hair, tisk. Let's go, let's go. Don't block his way. Stay away, I don't want any trouble. Students automatically cleared a path, literally opening a way for Ryo, their eyes avoiding him as if he were a plague. Who in their right mind would deliberately cross his path? Did they think they were tough enough to take a beating? What about Ryo himself? He couldn't even be bothered to lift an eyelid at these glancing eyes. He was used to it. Anyway, he wasn't rushing to school to see these people's faces. He had only one real task, catching up on sleep, to fiercely replenish his health bar after that devilish training last night. With faint dark circles under his eyes, his steps conveyed a numb, don't talk to me, vibe, his mind drifting with 2 big words, sleepy. Tired. Meanwhile, in the old mansion of the Senju clan. Just 5 more minutes of sleep, just 5 minutes. Kushina was groggily lingering in bed, the warm covers clinging to her like suction cups. Completely forgetting about waking up early for school. Uzumaki Mito slowly sipped her tea in the next room. Hearing no movement from Kushina's room, her lips curved into a smile. Little girl, it's time you learned a lesson. She wasn't in a hurry at all. Children, after all, would remember after being scolded by the teacher for being late once. A thin-skinned girl like her would surely not dare to lie in bed again. Hooah. When Kushina finally groggily opened her eyes and caught sight of the bright sun outside the window. Oh no. I'm going to be late. She sprang out of bed, as anxious as a cat with its tail stepped on. Grandma Mito, why didn't you wake me up? The little girl frantically pulled on her clothes, shouting outside with a tearful voice. Rushing to the sink, she hastily splashed water on her face, grabbed her hair and tied it up carelessly, but her red hair still defiantly sprouted a few unruly strands. Breakfast. No time for that. Kushina stormed out the door like a whirlwind, her short legs pattering as she ran wildly toward school. When she rushed to the main gate, the corner of her eye caught sight of the lunch bento on the table, specially prepared for her by Grandma Mito. Damn it. She forgot her lunch too. Kushina wailed inwardly, but her feet didn't stop. Never mind, I'll deal with it after school. Just go. By the time Kushina, panting and flushed, arrived at the classroom door, Teacher Kimura Shu was already enthusiastically lecturing at the blackboard with chalk in hand. The entire class's attention, with a swish, instantly focused on the red-haired little girl leaning on the doorframe, still gasping for air. The air solidified for 2 seconds. Kimura frowned. Uzumaki Kushina-san. Yays. I'm sorry, teacher. I overslept. Kushina's face was beet red, her head bowed low, feeling dozens of gazes piercing her like needles. A faint, ru, came from the back row by the window, Ryo's peaceful mumbling in his sleep, making Kushina's current discomfiture even more apparent. Kimura looked at the little girl's embarrassed face. After all, she was a new student, and it was her first time being late. He sighed and waved his hand. Never mind, since it's your first offense, go back to your seat. Be careful next time. Yays, thank you, sensei. Kushina felt as if she had been granted a great pardon, wishing she could bury her head in her chest and scurried back to her exclusive seat by the window. Passing by Minato, he cast a gentle and worried glance her way. Kushina didn't understand his gaze, only feeling that this sissy was mocking her, making her face even hotter, with anger. Embarrassing. So embarrassing. The little person in her heart was already banging against the wall. Sitting in her seat, she heard Kimura's continued lecture, her deskmate Ryo's steady snoring behind her, and faint, uncontrollable snickers. Kushina wished she could find a hole to crawl into. Time crawled by. What was the teacher talking about? Kushina didn't hear a single word. Grumble grumble. A sound so loud that Kushina wanted to die on the spot came from her empty stomach. It was so clear that students in the front and back rows probably heard it. She froze. Ryo, who was sleeping soundly beside her, seemed to and shifted his position, thankfully not waking up. The consequences of skipping breakfast began to retaliate without warning. Hunger was like a small hand, constantly scratching at her stomach. She was so annoyed she almost cried. Grandma Mito is too mean. Why didn't she just wake me up this morning? Now I'm not only being laughed at by the whole class for being late, but I'm also hungry. My bento. It's still on the table at home. Kushina desperately sprawled on her desk, pressing her arms tightly against her stomach, trying to suppress the hunger. But the more she pressed, the clearer the feeling became. Hungry, wronged, and humiliated. Kushina vowed never to sleep in again. Glancing at her red-haired deskmate who was sleeping soundly, the girl felt even more annoyed. Although Ryo was innocently sleeping soundly at this moment, it didn't stop the girl from taking out her anger on him. The Ninja Academy didn't have many classes. Usually, there were only 2 in the morning, but each class was as long and tedious. Finally. Ding-a-ling-a-ling. The dismissal bell sounded sweeter than celestial music. It was lunchtime. The classroom immediately became lively, filled with the sounds of lunchboxes opening and the aroma of food. This aroma was double torture for Kushina, who had been hungry for 2 classes all morning and whose stomach was rebelling. She covered her face with a worried expression. What should I do? Should I go home to eat? There's not enough time to go back and forth. Am I going to spend the afternoon hungry too? Just thinking about it made her vision go black. Just as Kushina was in a dilemma, worrying about her tragic lunch. The little blonde boy in the front seat picked up his lunchbox, turned back, and glanced at the distressed Kushina a few times, wanting to pluck up the courage to walk over. The little blonde, who had been paying attention to the girl, had, of course, heard Kushina's stomach rumbling that morning. However, just then, a lazy groan came from beside her. Kushina's unshakable deskmate, the sleeping tyrant, Ryo, was finally awakened by his lunch biological clock. He rubbed his sleepy eyes and stretched with a huge yawn. making Kushina inwardly grumble. Did sleeping suck all his energy? Then Ryo, very naturally and unhurriedly, pulled out a large, tightly wrapped bento package from his desk. No need to guess, it was definitely the luxurious product of last night's 100-pound cooking. The aroma of food seemed to subtly waft out from the package, precisely entering Kushina's nose. Kushina. She was even hungrier now. Hey. To be continued. Chapter 7. Crying won't work, but pork might. Gulp. Kushina clearly heard herself swallow a large mouthful of coveted saliva. Tears at the corners of her eyes wanted to spill out uncontrollably. She pursed her lips tightly, her eyes glued to the coarse cloth bag that Ryo slowly unfolded. The coarse cloth was peeled back layer by layer, revealing the main attraction inside, a huge, simple bamboo lunchbox lid, filled with meat. It wasn't the kind of soft, stewed chunks, but golden brown, crispy ribs with tiny oil bubbles sizzling at the edges. There were slices of smoked meat, cut uniformly thick, evenly coated in sauce, glistening invitingly. There were also chewy, well-marinated meat strips. The lunchbox seemed to have been specially insulated, and steam and aroma wafted upward. Kushina felt her stomach clench violently, and her empty belly let out a deafening roar. Gulu rulu rulu. This time, the sound was too loud. Several classmates around, who were also opening their lunchboxes, all looked over in unison, their gazes darting between Kushina and the sinfully fragrant plate of meat. Kushina's face instantly turned as red as a ripe apple, an intense shame intertwining with an almost devouring hunger. She no longer cared about her small resentment toward Ryo or the unpleasantness of yesterday. Heaven and earth were vast, but filling her stomach was paramount. She mustered the greatest courage of her life, abruptly turned her head, her light blue eyes wet with longing and embarrassment, and stared intently at the meat mountain lunchbox in Ryo's hand, which was larger than her own face. Ryokan. Her voice trembled slightly from nervousness and weakness, her fingers subconsciously twisting the hem of her clothes. Yours looks like so much. Can you? The rest of the words were really hard to say, but the desire for food ultimately overcame her shame. Can you share a little bit with me? Just a tiny bit. She quickly made a small gap with her thumb and forefinger, her voice as faint as a mosquito's, but full of pleading. Ryo was about to pick up a crispy, delicious-looking rib, thickly coated in sauce, when he heard Kushina's words and his movement paused in midair. He turned his head, his face expressionless, only the instinctive impatience of being disturbed during his meal. His deep-set eyes glanced at Kushina's cute, red, embarrassed little face, then lowered to look at his own important rations, which he had spent time and effort making last night to replenish his energy. He let out a short sound, his brows habitually furrowing slightly. Sorry. He refused bluntly, his tone flat, without malice, merely stating a fact. This is all for one person. He emphasized, person. What a joke, this little bit of meat wasn't even enough to fill his own teeth. All the energy to support his physical recovery was in this. How could there be any extra to give to others? Especially this deskmate he had only met yesterday, who was just a small trouble in his eyes. Ryo, was not some generous philanthropist. This cold, crisp refusal, without any room for negotiation, was like a small ice pick, precisely piercing Kushina's last bit of forced dignity. No. Not even a tiny bit. Was it because she was an outsider? Was it because she was new? Or was it because he was simply a cold, selfish, straight-laced jerk? The shame of being mocked for being late, the grievance, hunger, the feeling of being isolated, the pain of a fallen country, the helplessness of being alone in a strange environment, all the suppressed negative emotions erupted at this moment. Kushina felt like a balloon blown to its limit, and it exploded. No matter how strong Kushina used to be, she was still just an 8-year-old girl. So those light blue eyes, which had been stubbornly holding back tears, could no longer contain the surging emotion. Large, hot tears rolled out uncontrollably, sliding down her rosy cheeks, pat, falling onto the open textbook, quickly soaking into 2 dark flowers. She didn't wail like ordinary little girls, but just bit her lower lip tightly, letting the tears flow silently, her body trembling slightly from trying to suppress her sobs. She even stubbornly didn't raise a hand to wipe them away, just buried her head deeply into her arms again, curling into a ball. Her fiery red hair, at this moment, was no longer a dazzling flame, but like a cluster of fallen leaves, soaked by rain and trembling in the wind. Her appearance made her seem like she had been abandoned in a corner by the whole world. Ryo held the rib, frozen in place. Quote. His mind was instantly filled with question marks. Isn't it normal to refuse to share food? He didn't even have enough for himself. Being hungry was unpleasant, but, crying like this. Was it really that bad? Ryo looked at the fragrant meat in his hand, then at the red-haired girl next to him, who had shrunk into a trembling little shrimp, her tears almost soaking her textbook. Trouble. Just as he muttered this word in his heart, something suddenly pricked him. The scene before him completely exceeded his simple, logical scope of fighting, killing, eating, sleeping, and training. A little girl who had just been rejected by him, whose stomach was growling with hunger in front of him, and who was crying so miserably after being refused. His defense line of avoiding trouble and stay away from me instantly broke a large hole in the face of this silent, incredibly destructive terror attack. Her angry look after school yesterday and this pitiful little crybaby in front of him overlapped. A strange feeling called unease of conscience emerged in the straight-laced Ryo's heart, making him feel uncomfortable all over. Tisk, so annoying. Ryo growled. But his body acted before his brain. He almost rudely put down the rib, wiping his greasy fingers casually on his clothes. Frowning, he rummaged through the pile of meat. Which piece to choose? No, he really couldn't bear to part with it. Too many bones, this piece. Too fatty, afraid she'd choke. Damn it, why is sharing some meat so hard? Finally, as if he had made some huge decision, with a sense of tragic heroism akin to a warrior severing his own arm, he, with great effort, tore off a whole piece of fatty and lean meat, with tendons and skin, glistening with oil and substantial in weight, from the largest stewed hind leg, which he himself hadn't even dared to gnaw on yet, with the most sauce and the crispiest skin, a pig hock. The size of that pig hock was almost as big as Kushina's small face. Thick, rich sauce dripped down Ryo's fingers, steaming hot and fragrant. Ryo, with a dark expression, stiffly almost prodded this extremely tempting large piece of meat next to Kushina's lowered head. His voice was still stiff, with obvious impatience. Here. What are you crying for? Take it. Eat quickly. His tone was like he was dealing with a troublesome piece of garbage, rather than offering a fragrant piece of meat that could fill her stomach. That rich, immediate aroma of meat, like a tangible shockwave, instantly pierced through Kushina's self-pity. Her crying stopped abruptly. To be continued. Chapter 8. A pork hawk that broke the ice. Kushina suddenly looked up, her eyes brimming with tears, streaks still wet on her small face, her expression completely dazed. She stared blankly at Ryo's face, which carried an impatient look but was indeed handsome, then at the huge, glistening, sauce-colored pork hawk practically shoved up to her nose, as if it was glowing. This contrast was too much. The boy who had coldly rejected her just moments ago was now offering her a piece of meat that seemed to radiate a sacred light. Even though his attitude was fierce, the stiff way he handed it over, how could it be so clumsily funny? PFF'd. A jumble of emotions surged in Kushina's heart. The grievance hadn't fully faded, her hunger was unbearable, she was tempted by the huge piece of meat, and Ryo's stiff, awkward appearance had touched her strange sense of humor. She couldn't help but let out a laugh through her tears. This was probably the first person who had ever given her something just because, she cried, since arriving in Konoha. Even if his face was stern, even if his tone was poor, this care warmed the lonely heart of the red-haired girl. Thank you, her voice was nasal but much brighter. All those accusations of Ryo being a blockhead, cold, and selfish vanished instantly. At this moment, Kushina unilaterally stamped him with the can be friends seal. He was a good person. This simple, straightforward thought took root in her heart. Her hunger surged back with a vengeance. With food like this in front of her, who cared about image? Kushina instantly turned into a little hungry wolf. Not caring if her hands got greasy, she grabbed the massive pork hawk. She impatiently opened her mouth and took a huge bite at the thickest, juiciest part. Boom. Her taste buds exploded. This taste, this texture, was unlike anything she had ever eaten. The sauce was rich and mellow, with a hint of sweetness, savoriness, and deep spice, perfectly seeping into every fiber of meat. The lean meat wasn't dry at all. It had chew, yet was tender, tearing apart easily, becoming more fragrant with each bite. The fatty part was translucent, melting in her mouth, rich but not greasy, leaving behind only a mouthful of delicious aroma. The charred pork skin was the soul of the dish, crispy and elastic, slightly sticky with gelatin, chewy and full of fatty fragrance. The layers of spice didn't overwhelm the natural taste of the meat but instead enhanced it, bringing out a powerful flavor. Ooh, so delicious. Kushina cried out muffled, her light blue eyes wide and shining with disbelief and joy. In her entire life, whether in Uzushiogakure or at Grandma Mito's house, she had never tasted such an enchanting flavor. Half dead with hunger, eating this made her instantly feel like the happiest person alive. Any image of being a lady, any elegance or grace, was gone. Kushina transformed into a glutton, clutching the pork hock bigger than her fist with both hands, gnawing away fiercely. Her small mouth was crammed full, her cheeks puffed out, sauce smeared across her nose and mouth, but she didn't care, dedicating herself completely to the battle against delicious food. Her face showed intoxicated bliss, almost fainting from happiness. Ryo, who unknowingly received a good person card. He sat beside her, rib still untouched in his hand, his expression indescribable. Watching Kushina, who looked like a starving ghost reincarnated, happily gnawing away with an oily face, his mouth twitched uncontrollably. A little funny. But seeing his meat mountain rapidly shrinking, he felt real heartache. This was the energy he needed to recover his stamina. Hey, eat slower. No one's snatching it from you. Ryo finally couldn't help but remind her. His tone was stiff, but he genuinely worried she'd choke. MMMPH, so good, MMMPH. Kushina nodded furiously, showing she heard him, but her chewing never slowed, only accompanied by satisfied grunts as her eyes curved into crescents. Ryo rolled his eyes helplessly, looked away from her horrifying eating habits, and lowered his head to his own plate. No longer caring about the heartache, he grabbed his rib and bit into it fiercely, as if venting his frustration through appetite. Thus, in the back row of Classroom 3A of the Ninja Academy, by the window, a bizarre yet strangely harmonious scene unfolded. A red-haired boy in faded clothes, frowning with a helpless expression, gnawed at a roasted rib quickly and defensively, eyes locked on his food. Beside him, a small, round-faced, red-haired girl with tear streaks still on her cheeks ungracefully clutched a giant braised pork hock, gnawing furiously. Her small face was shiny with oil, her eyes sparkling, her expression filled with joy. When Ryo lowered his head, she even slyly stretched out her greasy hand and swiftly pinched a slice of smoked meat from the corner of his bento. Hey, that's mine. Ryo would occasionally notice and protest, but his hands didn't stop moving. HMPH. Stingy. You said you'd give me food. Kushina puffed her cheeks, retorting indistinctly, her eyes already on the roasted meat she had long coveted from his plate. I only gave you the pork hock. I never said you could steal the rest. Ryo firmly guarded his roasted meat. Stinky Ryo. I'm your friend now. What's wrong with friends sharing? Kushina's hands moved even bolder, even trying to grab a rib he had just picked up. She unilaterally decided they were friends, so she was emboldened. That naturally familiar, bold personality of hers shone through at this moment. Who's friends with you? You're a bandit. Give it back. Ryo was annoyed yet amused, blocking her quickly. The two squabbled and wrestled. Ryo had the strength to suppress her instantly, but he couldn't be serious with a little girl, so he only protested and guarded his food. For a moment, their two greasy faces were close, the small classroom table filled with the scent of oil and helpless bickering. In the end, although Ryo protected the core supplies like large chunks of meat in the main leg portion, Kushina still managed to plunder about 10% of his slices and many smoked strips. Satisfied, Kushina patted her round belly and let out a loud, happy burp. Her small face shone with oil, her smile as bright as a blooming flower. All her grievances from yesterday had vanished completely thanks to this greasy, delicious meal. Her stomach was full, her mood ecstatic. Ryo. Definitely a good person, cold on the outside but warm inside. He could be a friend. As for his loss-making, sour face, Kushina ignored it. Meanwhile, Ryo stared at his half-empty energy replenishment box, his brows twisted into a knot. Looking at the satisfied little redhead still licking sauce from the corners of her mouth, he once again realized what it meant to ask for trouble, and that women are trouble. But strangely, he didn't feel that angry anymore. Their lively food-snatching scene had already drawn the whole class's attention. Everyone's expressions were vivid, dumbfounded, disbelieving, their worldview shaken. Oh my god, the red-haired bully Ryo actually had this side to him. Eye-opening. In the front row, Minato quietly watched Kushina and Ryo's playful scuffle. He looked down at his carefully prepared bento, filled with neat rice balls and side dishes. His original plan to bravely offer it froze completely. His warm, sunny smile stiffened on his face, and for the first time, a hint of sadness and loss appeared in his bright blue eyes. He didn't step forward. He silently opened the lid, took a bite of his rice ball, but it was tasteless. The classroom buzzed with voices and the aroma of food. Sunlight, dust, grease, arguments, burps, bulging bellies, a helpless sour face, a satisfied smiling one, all mixed together, forming a chaotic but real picture of hunger, forced sharing, delicious food, misunderstandings, and the first recognition of friendship. For Ryo and Kushina, the invisible wall between them was unexpectedly shattered by a sauce-covered pork hock, leaving behind a crack. To be continued. 6 comments 0 vote. Chapter 9. Danzo having a meltdown. In the Hokage's office, smoke billowed. The third Hokage, Sarutobi Hiruzen, held his pipe between his teeth, the tobacco in its bowl flickering on and off. His fingertip lightly tapped the smooth surface of the crystal ball. The blurry light and shadow within instantly sharpened, focusing on the corner by the window in Class 3A of the Konoha Ninja Academy. Beside him, in a large armchair, Uzumaki Mito sat perfectly upright. The traces of time on her face were cleverly locked away by the yin seal, leaving only a pair of eyes, deep with wisdom, now watching the scene in the crystal ball with great interest. The ball showed Kushina snatching food and Ryo protecting his. It was far from refined, even a bit wild, but to the two figures before the crystal ball it felt like the warm sun in winter, comforting their hearts. Hee. The third Hokage exhaled a long plume of smoke, the wrinkles on his old face relaxing somewhat. Mito-sama, look, this child Kushina is starting to put down roots in Konoha. She is finding her own bonds. He glanced at Mito, his tone carrying the relief of a heavy burden lifting. The third Hokage might not fully understand Jinchuriki, but he understood the power of bonds. Ryo, this ruthless commoner he had secretly observed for a long time, forming a connection with the future Jinchuriki was simply a stroke of luck. Mito's gaze remained on the two small figures wrestling in the crystal ball, her eyes showing a gentle understanding of the world. She saw deeper than Hiruzen. The brat Ryo, with his scowling face as he protected his food, the helpless yet genuine offer of a pig's trotter, was proof that his heart had been touched. Saru, I am old, she nodded slightly, her voice soft but weighty. The Konoha of the future will ultimately be supported by these youngsters, just as Hashirama and Tobarama entrusted the burden to you back then, trusting you all the same. Hiruzen's expression grew more solemn, and he nodded gravely. Yes, Mito-sama. Your teachings, I have never dared to forget. Do not interfere too much with Kushina, she instructed, her gaze lingering on the girl's satisfied smile in the crystal ball. Let her enjoy this time in the academy like an ordinary child. A Jinchuriki's heart naturally has a void that needs to be filled with happy memories. The strongest shackles are not imprisonment, but warm bonds. As the current vessel of the Nine Tails, her words carried authority. I guarantee it, Mito-sama. Hiruzen's voice was heavy and resolute. He understood the immense weight of Mito's entrustment. Mito said no more, simply nodded gently, and rose to leave. The heavy office door closed silently behind her, leaving the third alone in the smoke-filled room with the still boisterous scene in the crystal ball. The quiet lasted less than 2 minutes. Bang! The Hokage's office door was pushed open unceremoniously, so hard the doorframe shook. Shimura Danzo walked in without pleasantries or even a polite facade, going straight to the point. Hiruzen. Danzo's voice was low, laced with suppressed anger. Uzumaki Kushina, as a crucial future Jinchuriki, should be immediately placed under strict supervision. Train her into a precise, ruthless weapon that only obeys orders. That is the safest plan. Allowing her to fool around in school is like exposing a top-tier strategic weapon to uncontrolled variables. You are playing with fire. He glanced at the crystal ball, just in time to see Kushina steal another piece of fragrant grilled meat from Ryo's lunchbox, their two red heads nearly touching. Disgust deepened in his eyes. Especially that brat named Ryo. His very existence is a source of interference. All contact between him and the Jinchuriki must be severed immediately. Hiruzen's expression became calm. He gently tapped the edge of his desk with his pipe. This is Mito-sama's choice, Danzo. His voice was not loud, but exceptionally firm, directly invoking Mito Uzumaki's will. Mito-sama's choice. Danzo's tone suddenly rose, dripping with sarcasm. Hiruzen, your weakness is that you are too soft, too superstitious about these so-called bonds. It is womanly compassion. He stepped forward, almost glaring down at Hiruzen. Bonds. What are those intangible bonds? Can you guarantee that this little girl, with the seeds of hatred for the destruction of the land of whirlpools buried deep in her heart, and the stubborn blood of the Uzumaki clan in her veins, will fully identify with Konoha just because of a few so-called friends? She was not even born in Konoha. He spread his hand, as if sketching a blueprint. Give her to me. To Root. I guarantee you, within half a year, I will return to you a perfect weapon, absolutely obedient, with a heart of stone, burning only for Konoha. This is the most responsible approach for the village. Danzo's voice was full of persuasion, yet carried a mechanical coldness. Hiruzen met Danzo's oppressive gaze, his eyes unwavering, like bedrock. I said, this is Mito-sama's choice, Danzo. If I hand the Jinchuriki over to you, I am afraid I will not sleep soundly again. Quote. You bastard. Danzo almost suffocated himself. This excuse again. It is always Mito-sama's choice. Can't you come up with a different one? Danzo was enraged by the unyielding refusal. Control over the core asset, the Jinchuriki, was right before his eyes, yet he could not touch it because of an old woman's will. His thoughts raced, and he decisively took a step back, though his gaze stayed fixed on the other red-haired figure in the crystal ball, like a predator locking onto prey. Fine. If you insist on handling the Jinchuriki according to Mito-sama's way, I will give up. Danzo's voice was cold and hard. But that boy, Ryo Kamiyama. His actions in the academy are no secret. A genius who, at such a young age, can subdue all the teachers and students in the entire academy. His potential needs guidance, and more importantly, control. Hand him over to Root. My newly established department needs precisely this kind of ruthless, strong seed that can take root in the shadows and draw nourishment for Konoha. A person who could dominate the entire school in such impoverished circumstances, with such tenacity and immense potential, was tailor-made for Root. All that was needed was to sever unnecessary emotions and refine him into absolute loyalty to the village, the essence of a ruthless blade. In the future, he would be Root's deadly weapon, buried in Konoha or deep within enemy nations. The sharpest blade in Danzo Shimura's hand. Hiruzen picked up his pipe, refilled it with tobacco, his movements slow and steady. He lit it with a match, took a deep puff, and let the pungent smoke swirl in his lungs. When he spoke again, through the billowing smoke, his gaze became extremely sharp, piercing Danzo. Ryo is not suited for Root, the third said, clear as a steel nail driven into wood. He has light within him. His path should be walked openly, under the sun. He is one of the inheritors of the will of fire, the future of Konoha I envision, not some root buried deep underground. He did not mention Ryo's Senju lineage, nor the secrets of his early observations, but the protective intent in his words was beyond doubt. Inheritor of the will of fire. Danzo sounded like he had heard the most preposterous joke. He laughed in anger, his eyes bloodshot with agitation. Sarutobi Hiruzen, are you blind? A commoner brat who only sleeps in class and dominates through fighting, and you dare call him an inheritor of the will of fire. His chakra reserves are so low that even graduation is in question. Putting him under your imagined sunlight will only raise an unruly brute. Root, he suddenly clenched his fist, his nails digging into his palm. Root is the true foundation of Konoha. Only there can he be molded into a true pillar. Hand him over to me and let him become the sharp sword that guards Konoha's roots. Isn't that maximizing his value? Your so-called sunny path is just letting him run wild. Hiruzen, you are too greedy. Danzo slammed his hand on the table. You will not give me the Jinchuriki. Fine. That is the village's nuclear weapon, I will leave it. Now, you want to monopolize an outstanding genius too. You will not let go of either. How can you hog all the benefits? Hiruzen slowly stood up. His physique was not massive, but at this moment he exuded undeniable authority. He no longer cited Mito's name, nor did he continue to argue about Ryo's value. He simply stared calmly at Danzo with eyes that seemed to see through people's hearts, and said, word by word. Danzo, remember. He paused, then declared with absolute clarity. I, Sarutobi Hiruzen, am the Hokage. The third directly used his authority to suppress him. Hiruzen's meaning was clear. I am the Hokage. I want it all. If you do not like it, tough luck. The single phrase, I am the Hokage, struck Danzo's soft spot. A higher rank crushes people. Danzo truly dreamed of becoming Hokage. He had long wanted to experience what it felt like to have Hiruzen beneath him. Good. Sarutobi Hiruzen, you will regret this. Danzo took a deep breath, calming himself. Ultimately, he was not the Hokage, only an assistant to Konoha's Hokage. Root was still in its infancy. In front of Hiruzen, all he could do was threaten, spit harsh words, and then leave. With a bang, Danzo left the Hokage's office, a place that haunted his dreams. The office immediately returned to silence, only the slightly trembling door proving the intense confrontation that had just occurred. Hiruzen slowly sat back in his chair. He took a deep breath, picked up his pipe again, his gaze deep and distant. To be continued. Chapter 10. Friends share. A few days passed in a flash. At the Ninja Academy, aside from the last 5 minutes before class ended, the liveliest time was when the lunch bell rang. The usual spot at the back of classroom 3A, by the window, was Kushina and Ryo's battlefield. However, this battlefield was a war for food. Ryo had just placed his coarse cloth bag on the table, and before he could even untie it, a fiery red little shadow zipped over from beside him. Kushina's eyes were as bright as light bulbs, fixed on the cloth bag, her small nose sniffing like a puppy. Hee, Ryo. Kushina's cute round face bloomed into a smile, and she casually tugged at his arm. What good stuff did you bring today? Is it still that braised pork hock? Or those crispy pork ribs? She was drooling so much she could barely hold it in. She had not even glanced at the bento box Grandma Mito packed for her that morning, just waiting to snatch Ryo's. Ryo did not even bother to lift an eyelid, swatting away her paw. Go, go, go. Eat your own. If you try to snatch mine again, I will get mad. As he spoke, he deftly untied the cloth bag and lifted the large bamboo lunchbox lid. Golden, fragrant, crispy roasted pork ribs were neatly arranged, sizzling with tiny bubbles of oil. Beside them were thick slices of smoked pork, glistening with oil and exuding a rich, dominant aroma. There were also a few strips of cured meat that looked incredibly tender. The insulation was excellent. A waft of rich, hot steam whooshed right into Kushina's face. Kushina gulped a big mouthful of saliva, her eyes wide, and her stomach protested on cue. Grr, Ryo, look. My tummy is protesting. It says it wants those ribs. Her little face crumpled, feigning pitifulness with remarkable skill. Ryo did not fall for it. He picked up the fattiest rib and brought it to his mouth, biting into it with a satisfying crunch, his words muffled. Protesting. Let it protest by itself. I calculated this perfectly. It is just enough for me. No share for you. As he chewed, he pointed to Kushina's lonely bento on her desk. There. That is yours. Kushina glanced at her, simple and elegant, little lunchbox, her mouth pouting so much you could hang an oil bottle from it. HMPH. Grandma Mito packed it for me, so it is definitely light flavored again. It is not as fragrant as yours. Suddenly, her eyes darted, revealing a cunning smile. Her small hand shot toward Ryo's lunchbox. I will just try a tiny piece. Just one tiny piece. We are friends, what is wrong with sharing? Ah, not a chance. Ryo was quick-eyed and quick-handed, dodging with his lunchbox like a mother hen protecting her chicks, almost getting oil on his clothes. Kushina, how many times have I told you? Friends are friends, but if you try to snatch my food again, I will get angry. His face was sour. This little redhead was really pushing it. Last time, a big pork hock did not just open her appetite, it also unleashed her bandit nature. Kushina missed, but she was not angry. Instead, she put her hands on her hips and declared righteously, stingy Ryo. I compensated you with my bento last time, did I not? And you ate it too. Exchange. This is fair exchange. Her exchange was purely forced buying and selling. Ryo had to pinch his nose to eat her fresh and light bento. As a carnivore, he found it completely unsatisfying. Who cares about your grass leaves? Ryo grumbled, but his movements slowed slightly. In that instant, Kushina seized the opportunity. With lightning speed, her small hand swished into the corner of the lunchbox, precisely pinching away the most beautiful slice of smoked meat. Got it. Kushina cheered, the meat slice instantly disappearing into her mouth. A look of immense satisfaction bloomed on her cute little face. Ooh, delicious. Ryo, your cooking is absolutely amazing. She even exaggeratedly smacked her lips. Ryo looked at the missing slice of prime smoked meat in his lunchbox, feeling his heart bleed. Kushina did not care, happily licking the oil from her fingers. Hee, it is your fault for being my first friend in Konoha. What is wrong with a friend eating a piece of your meat? This line had practically become her catchphrase and invincible excuse. Ryo rolled his eyes at her friend, logic, a knot of frustration tightening in his chest. Every night when he cooked, he would inexplicably add more meat to his lunchbox. Ryo himself pondered, damn it. What am I doing this for? Is this not asking for trouble? My cursed hands. He cursed, but the meat slices were added nonetheless. It seemed watching the little redhead's eyes curve into crescents of joy just from getting a bite of something delicious did not seem so bad. Ryo felt incredibly conflicted, as if his principles were slowly being gnawed away by a certain red-haired little squirrel. Ryo sighed, resigned, pushing his lunchbox slightly toward the middle. He gruffly said, "Finish your own portion quickly, and stop staring at mine." His words were fierce, but his actions seemed to tacitly approve of Kushina's bandit behavior. Kushina was sharp. She immediately caught this tiny softening. She cheered and practically glued herself to him, beginning a new round of foraging. I know. Ryo is the best." Her words were sweet, and her hands were just as quick. To be continued. Chapter 11. Minato's Speed. Minato stood opposite him, his lips pressed tightly together. His usually gentle and sunny face was now exceptionally serious, and deep within his azure eyes, a defiant glint flickered. There was also a hint of unutterable reluctance. Kushina was watching not far away, yet she seemed detached, always clinging to Ryo, with eyes only for him. Minato was unwilling to accept this. He wanted to prove something. Ryo shook his arm, which had gone somewhat numb from sleep, and did not even bother to look his opponent in the eye. His tone was filled with the annoyance of having his sweet dreams disturbed. Tisk, hurry up. I can still catch a nap after this. He had little interest in this match. In his eyes, the little blonde boy in front of him was no different from the noisy cicadas in the trees. Even if the little blonde boy was the future Yondaime, they were all just sources of noise preventing him from sleeping. Both sides formed the seal of confrontation. Kimura Shu called out somewhat nervously, afraid he would not be able to control the situation the next second. After the seals were formed. Begin. Minato moved. His figure flickered, so fast it left an afterimage in the air, and his hands instantly formed seals. This was his pride, his speed far exceeding his peers. With two soft bang sounds, two Minato clones identical to him appeared on his left and right. The three of them, in a triangular formation, lunged fiercely at Ryo. One of the clones even mimicked a low kick. The exquisite coordination and precise timing made many students secretly gasp. So fast. Such skilled three-body technique. Few peers could probably block it. However, is that all? Ryo almost instantly caught Minato's movements the moment the original started to speed up. His lazy eyes were now filled with pure combat instinct. He did not even use chakra. His body simply shifted naturally to one side, and his left hand casually reached out and grabbed forward, as if swatting a fly. Clap. A crisp sound echoed across the training ground. Minato, as fast as a gust of wind, had his swift wrist precisely gripped by Ryo like an iron clamp. Minato's charge abruptly stopped, all the illusions instantly dissipated, and his face was filled with incredulous shock. He struggled with all his might to break free, but the immense force on his wrist remained unmoving, as if cast in iron and stone. Ryo gave Minato no time to react at all. He did not use any complex moves. He simply used the momentum of grabbing Minato to pull him forward, while simultaneously arching his knee sharply. Thud. A dull, heart-pounding thud echoed. That seemingly casual knee strike landed squarely on Minato's abdomen. Ah! Minato's eyes instantly bulged. His entire body arched upward uncontrollably, as if struck by a speeding rhinoceros, and intense pain and a sense of suffocation instantly overwhelmed all his senses. Saliva mixed with stomach acid spilled from the corners of his mouth. All his calculations and techniques were instantly shattered in the face of absolute power. But this was not over yet. Ryo's hand, gripping Minato's wrist, suddenly slammed him downward. Plop. Minato could not even let out a cry of pain. His entire body was slammed heavily onto the hard dirt of the training field, sending dust flying. The immense impact shook his internal organs as if they were dislocated, and his bones seemed to wail. Ryo released his hand and looked down at the little blonde boy, curled up on the ground and painfully retching. His face still showed impatience. Still fighting. Just concede and get it over with. In his eyes, this battle was already over, and there was no need to drag it out. Ah! Minato convulsed with pain, but the stubborn spirit of youth was completely ignited. Kushina was watching from the side. No. It absolutely could not end like this. I have not lost yet. Minato squeezed out a few words through gritted teeth, supporting himself with his hands on the ground, using all his strength, swaying unsteadily, and struggling to get up. His small, dust-covered body trembled, seeming as if it could fall again at any moment, but his eyes were fixed on Ryo. Tisk. Ryo clicked his tongue in annoyance. He did not understand where this kid got his stubbornness, but since his opponent still wanted to fight, he would not hold back. Minato gritted his teeth and charged again, his speed much slower than before, but every punch and kick used his remaining strength, aiming directly at Ryo's head, chest, and other vital points. He was desperately searching for even the slightest flaw. Unfortunately, all of this appeared as slow motion in Ryo's eyes. Ryo did not even bother to dodge much. Minato's full-force punches landed on him with only faint thump-thump sounds, like a tickle. He retaliated with extreme simplicity and directness. He blocked Minato's punch aimed at his head and slammed a punch back at his opponent's shoulder. Crack! A clear sound of dislocation rang out, and Minato's left shoulder instantly dislocated. He dodged a side kick, casually grabbed the incoming ankle, and lightly flipped it. Thump! Minato awkwardly fell back onto the dirt again. He struggled to get up and lunged again. Ryo sidestepped, and his elbow followed through with a precise backward strike. Thud! Minato felt his vision go black, a shattering pain in his back, his breathing completely stopped, and a metallic taste rose in his throat. A punch. A knee strike. A slam. A dislocation. A flip. An elbow strike. The battle was completely one-sided, purely unilateral. The training ground was dead silent. Every dull impact sound made the students' eyelids twitch. Watching the usually gentle and cheerful, academically excellent Minato being casually knocked down, slammed, and sent flying by Ryo like a lifeless sandbag, only to stubbornly struggle to get up again and again, then be beaten even more severely, many people turned pale and instinctively covered their eyes. Finally, after being kicked in the abdomen by Ryo once more, flying a few meters like a broken kite, Minato fell to the ground, twitched a few times, and then completely went silent. He lay there like a pile of mud, his body covered in dust mixed with sweat, his small face pale and ashen, having completely lost consciousness. Silence. The entire field was as silent as death. Only the rustling of wind through the leaves and the slightly annoyed panting of the red-haired boy in the center of the training ground, who had loosened up his limbs, could be heard. He glanced down at the unconscious Minato on the ground, his eyes showing no emotion, as if he had merely crushed an annoying insect. What he was thinking now was that he hoped the remaining classes would be as easy as this warm-up, or even better, that school would simply end so he could go back to sleep. Kimura Shu snapped back to reality with a start, frantically rushing into the field to check Minato's injuries, sweat beading on his forehead. Quick! Medical team! Carry him to the infirmary. Several students timidly stepped forward, carefully lifting the unconscious, badly injured Minato, and hurried away from the training ground. As they passed Ryo, they did not even dare to breathe loudly. Ryo did not even look at Minato being carried away. He leisurely stretched, then slowly strolled back to the old oak tree. He adjusted himself into a comfortable position and leaned back, his eyelids heavy as they drooped. As everyone's complex and reverent gazes focused on him, this red-haired tyrant who had just displayed absolute crushing power so nonchalantly and quickly re-entered his charging mode. On the training ground, the still-shaken people looked at each other. This short yet brutal battle once again thoroughly confirmed Ryo's fearsome reputation as being at the top of the Ninja Academy food chain, and extinguished the last lingering thoughts of challenge hidden in countless hearts. Minato's stubbornness and excellence instead became the best backdrop to highlight Ryo's monster name. The sun was still dazzling, but the temperature of the training ground seemed to have quietly dropped a few degrees. Top floor of the Hokage building. Sarutobi Hiruzen silently put down his pipe. The crystal ball reflected the red-haired boy who had fallen back asleep in the corner of the training ground. Behind him, his three disciples, Orochimaru, Jiraiya, and Tsunade, watched all of this with varying expressions. To be continued. Chapter 12. The redhead gets a master, the blonde gets stuck with Jiraiya. The office was silent. Hiruzen turned around, clearing his dry throat. His voice wasn't loud, but it was exceptionally clear in the dead silence. Speak up. He twirled the pipe in his hand, a few specks of ash falling. What do you think of that live combat assessment just now, how was it? His gaze swept over the three people in front of him. Jiraiya was the first to bounce up. His hedgehog-like white hair was practically exploding, and his face still held an astonished expression. He rushed to the desk, hands pressed against the edge, excitement overflowing. My God! Jiraiya blurted out, then lowered his voice slightly, but was still agitated. That blonde kid. He's amazing. He spoke rapidly. That blonde kid, he's as fast as the wind. Clones, Kawarimi no Jutsu, tactical coordination, it was all seamless. Clean and precise. His willpower is terrifyingly strong, he got knocked flying and still charged back in. His combat awareness is superb, every move aimed at a weakness. He's definitely a top genius. Only a third year. He's already much stronger than a typical genin. Changing the subject, Jiraiya suddenly turned his head to look at the blonde figure beside him, Tsunade, his tone carrying a clear sense of lingering fear. As for that redhead, Tsunade, you know best about beating people up. You tell me. Was that a fight? It was practically dismantling parts. Every punch and kick was brutally vicious. Pure savagery. Tsunade was standing with her arms crossed, leaning against the bookshelf, her brows tightly furrowed. Every fierce, dull strike from Ryo in the crystal ball seemed to pound at the heart of her, a taijutsu master. A monster. Tsunade spat out 2 words, like stones hitting the ground. She unconsciously stroked her smooth chin, as if savoring that power. Is his name Ryo? Nawaki mentioned this kid to me before, HMPH, finally got to see him. His timing was as precise as if he'd calculated every step of that blonde kid. Tsunade's eyes gleamed, like she was dissecting a perfect specimen. Force generation, muscles, joints, power transmission, terrifyingly smooth. Frighteningly efficient. He's practically a living textbook for taijutsu. At least top-tier Chunin level. His true level. He didn't even show it. It ended too quickly, that kid, he didn't even use his full strength. Or was he in a hurry? Her lips curved upwards, with the excitement of discovering new prey. I really want to measure his depth with my fists. The third Hokage, HM Med, and turned to the effeminate, pale-faced young man beside him. Orochimaru, you speak. Orochimaru tilted his head slightly. In his early 20s, the sharpness of youth had not yet faded, but in his golden vertical pupils, a steady yet sharp wisdom already flickered. Tsunade and Jiraiya, Orochimaru began, what they said, is all correct. He paused, a subtle curve appearing on his lips for a moment. The blonde one, a genius. The blonde one, a genius. His character, talent, a flawless gem. His tone suddenly shifted, his golden vertical pupils precisely looking at the spot where the crystal ball had extinguished, as if piercing through the wall to the oak tree on the training ground. The redhead. His power, is eerily pure. Pure, violent aesthetics. His snake eyes turned to the third Hokage, with a sense of seeing through everything. Sensei. You specifically called the 3 of us to watch this performance. What is your intention? Orochimaru leaned forward slightly, his posture respectful, his question cutting to the core. 2 astonishingly brilliant geniuses. Hiruzen's eyes flickered. He didn't answer immediately, instead picking up his pipe and slowly filling it with fresh tobacco. He lit it, took a deep puff, then exhaled thick smoke. Amidst the swirling smoke, Hiruzen's voice was low and decisive. The 3 of you, his gaze swept over Jiraiya and Tsunade, lingering slightly on Orochimaru, are elite Jonin, pillars of the village. His tone carried pride, and also an invisible urging. These past few years, ever since you graduated, the pipe in his hand tapped the air, those 2, are the most dazzling. You all saw Minato's talent. Ryo, his actions are wild, but his power is genuine. Both are future pillars of the village. Hiruzen's speaking pace slowed, each word clear and powerful. Konoha's strength relies on succession. The will of fire relies on you to pass it down. I am old. He flicked the ash, his tone becoming a command, allowing no room for doubt. You should consider taking on disciples. Pass down your skills, your paths. Which of you will take these 2? This sentence exploded like a bomb in the silent office. Hiruzen's meaning was laid bare, to firmly bind these 2 immensely potential newcomers to the Hokage lineages shipped through the master-disciple relationship. Jiraiya was still savoring the battle, regretting Minato's defeat, and his eyes almost popped out when he heard this. Tsunade's arm-crossing posture remained unchanged, a thoughtful look in her eyes. Orochimaru's face instantly froze, his golden snake pupils narrowing into a cold line, and the temperature in the office seemed to drop sharply. Take, a disciple. He repeated softly, his voice flat and devoid of emotion. Hiruzen's heart sank sharply. Orochimaru's mind was currently filled with forbidden jutsu, the origin of chakra, and the ultimate mysteries of the human body. These things sucked away all his energy and curiosity like a black hole. Playing house with children. A waste of life. It would severely slow down his pursuit of ultimate truth. Forgive me, sensei. Orochimaru bowed slightly. Currently, his choice of words was cold. I have no interest in this kind of enlightenment education. My energy needs to be used in more valuable places. The subtext was loud and clear. I have no time for so-called geniuses. Besides, who isn't a genius? A hint of disappointment flashed in Hiruzen's eyes. He had somewhat expected Orochimaru's refusal. So he turned his gaze to the remaining two, Jiraiya, Tsunade. Jiraiya scratched his head, looked at Hiruzen, then glanced at the spot where the crystal ball had disappeared, his mind a mess. Take Minato. This kid's talent is top-notch, teaching him shouldn't be too difficult. A bit stubborn, but quite suited to his own ninjutsu path. As for Ryo, Jiraiya shivered, subconsciously rubbing his arms. His own style involved summoning animals, various strange techniques. Pure taijutsu head-on. Thinking about Ryo's bone-crushing fists, if he were to teach Ryo his own ninjutsu, he'd drone on for ages, and that redhead would get annoyed and swat him away. Tisk. No way. Too hardcore. Can't handle it. That redhead. A clear, powerful voice suddenly broke the silence. Tsunade suddenly spoke, her chin raised, her lips curved. Ryo, I'll take him. She stood ramrod straight, her chest rising and falling, her sharp gaze sweeping over Jiraiya's bewildered face. As for that blonde kid Minato. She pointed casually at Jiraiya, with a hint of you're getting off easy. He's yours, Jiraiya. A few days ago, if Grandma Mito hadn't mentioned this redhead Ryo, whom Kushina was particularly concerned about yet couldn't handle. With her troublever's personality, she probably would have just said, get lost, like Orochimaru. Jiraiya, being named and assigned, felt like he'd been hit by a blunt object. Then his expression changed several times, from, me again. With a sense of grievance, to, maybe it's not so bad. With resignation, and finally his shoulders slumped. Huh. Oh. Jiraiya haphazardly scratched his white hair, trying to look serious as he faced the third Hokage, but the effect was clumsy. Alright, sensei, he nodded. The blonde kid Minato. I'll take him. He instinctively obeyed his sensei's command. Thinking calmly, Ryo's violent demolition style was indeed more suitable for Tsunade, who also enjoyed violence, to handle. Taking on the blonde Minato, should be less trouble. Hiruzen watched as things settled, the tense string in his heart finally loosening significantly. It's done. Even smoother than expected. Tsunade's proactive move solved his biggest worry, Danzo. No matter how long that guy's arm was, he wouldn't be able to reach into the sphere of influence of Tsunade's disciple. Good. The pipe thumped heavily on the desk with a thud. This matter, Hiruzen's gaze swept over Tsunade and Jiraiya, is entrusted to the two of you. Tsunade. Jiraiya. You two go and contact and assess them privately, then give me the results. To be continued. Chapter 13. Piggyback Rescue. The school bell rang, signaling the end of classes. The last rays of sunlight slipped away from the office. The oil lamp crackled, casting its light on homeroom teacher Kimura Shu's face, a mix of exhaustion and forced sternness. A thin layer of sweat slicked his forehead, and his voice, deliberately lowered, enunciated each word with effort. Ryokan. Unity and friendship are the will of fire. Sparring in taijutsu class isn't a fight to the death. Minato-kun is still in the medical ward, with a dislocated shoulder, contusions under his ribs, and a mild concussion. Kimura Shu lectured until his throat was dry, but the figure across the desk remained as stubborn as a reef. This child's notorious reputation preceded him. Which teacher in the entire ninja academy didn't turn a blind eye to his antics? But this time, he had gone too far. And Ryo. His eyelids drooped as if he hadn't fully woken up, barely managing to keep his head from thudding onto the desk. Faced with his unyielding demeanor, Kimura Shu was utterly helpless, only a sigh escaping him. Kimura Shu waved a hand, tiredly rubbing his temples. Alright, go home. Next time, remember to keep your limits in mind. Got it, Ryo mumbled in response. He grabbed the faded, worn at the edges old school bag from the back of his chair, slung it carelessly over his shoulder, twisted the doorknob, and walked out without a backward glance. His movements were as swift as if fleeing a plague. The corridor was quiet, only faint shouts echoing from the distant training ground. The school gate was mostly empty. Just a few steps outside the school gate, a suppressed sob and a harsh burst of laughter reached Ryo's ears. Turning the corner into the shadow of the street, he saw a group of people gathered there. A genin, wearing a Konoha forehead protector, was pulling a small figure up from the ground by her fiery red hair. It was Kushina. Her small face was covered in dust, mixed with tears and despair, like a crumpled, dirty rag doll. Several older students and the genin laughed together. One of them pointed at Kushina's red hair, laughing so hard he doubled over. Ha ha ha, look, Yamada-san, I told you so. She looks like a ripe, rotting tomato. It's this weird red hair. The genin named Yamada's voice rose, filled with malice, his fingers twisting her strands of hair as if they were something filthy. So ugly and red, you won't find a third one like it in all of Konoha. He looked around, seeking more agreement. And her temper is absolutely awful. Isn't that right, little runt? Kushina hung suspended, her feet dangling, and the last spark of defiance in her light blue eyes completely extinguished. Yamada's words, especially, tomato, the explosion of laughter in the classroom a few days ago, the nasty taunts, the cold malice, like a tide, instantly engulfed her. All her grievances, helplessness, anger, and self-loathing for her red hair burst forth. Wah, I. Kushina's voice shattered, no longer her usual stubbornness, but a wail of utter defeat, tears mixing with dirt as they streamed down. I hate this red hair the most myself. Wah. That desperate cry pricked a nerve in Ryo. It wasn't just Kushina's red hair they were mocking. That was his own taboo, a taboo he had beaten the entire ninja academy into submission to suppress. More than that, they were mocking Kushina herself, the only one who wasn't afraid to approach him, the little bandit classmate who dared to steal his rations, the troublesome friend he complained about but would secretly add an extra portion of food for at night. Yamada was still grinning triumphantly, saying to those around him, "Did you hear that? Even she herself, huh?" Before he could finish, his vision blurred. The onlookers didn't even see how the figure rushed over. They only felt a gust of foul wind. Ryo's face was as cold as frost, the chill in his eyes sharper than a blade. He didn't even speak, that ferocious aura unreservedly crushing down. The older students who had been laughing a second ago instantly became like chickens with their necks squeezed, their smiles frozen on their faces as they instinctively took a few steps back. Ryo. The triumph on Yamada's face instantly turned to terror, his voice changing pitch. Of course he recognized that face, that red hair. This was the Ninja Academy's most terrifying nightmare. Damn it. Didn't they say it was a world of difference once you graduated and became a genin? The Chunin leading his team had thumped his chest, guaranteeing, Ninja Academy students are like little brothers in front of genin. That voice was still buzzing in his ears. It was all nonsense. A monster was still a monster. The brief surge of confidence from successfully becoming a genin made him think he was capable. He had specifically returned to the Ninja Academy today to settle the scores from when he used to get beaten up. But the nightmare itself was right before his eyes. He wanted to let go, wanted to retreat. Too late. Ryo's movements were as swift as a ghost. His right hand shot out like lightning, not a fist, but 5 fingers gripping Yamada's wrist, the one still clutching Kushina's hair. Snap. The crisp sound of bone dislocating was incredibly clear. Og. Yamada's pig-like shriek almost tore through the twilight sky. The intense pain made him instantly release his grip. Kushina fell to the ground as if her strength had given out. Ryo didn't even glance at Kushina, his icy gaze fixed solely on Yamada's face, contorted with pain and fear. The grip on his wrist didn't loosen in the slightest, even twisting cruelly. Yamada felt his bones groan and shatter. He tried to break free, but found the strength from the hand gripping him was like an iron clamp, unmoving. Ryo's other hand balled into a fist at his waist, his elbow slamming backward, striking Yamada squarely in the chest and abdomen without any fancy moves. Thud. A dull, heart-stopping impact sounded. Yamada's body arched sharply upward like a broken sack, his eyeballs bulging, his scream abruptly cut short, turning into a gasping, rattling sound as saliva mixed with suspicious acidic fluid spewed out. A violent sense of suffocation and the pain of tearing internal organs instantly overwhelmed him. Ryo's movements were as fluid as breathing. His right arm, twisting the wrist, combined with the power from his waist and legs, used the momentum to forcefully slam Yamada against the cold stone wall beside them. Clang. Crash. Yamada's body hit the wall squarely, without any cushioning. A massive impact echoed through the alley, making people's eardrums throb. Loose stones crumbled down from the wall. Yamada slid down the wall like a flattened fly, collapsing onto the ground, his body twitching irregularly, unable to even whimper. His brand new ninja forehead protector hung askew on one side of his forehead, the beautiful swirl symbol dull and lifeless. The world fell silent. The entire process took no more than 5 seconds. The onlookers' faces were ashen, silent as cicadas, their eyes on Ryo as if looking at a true demon or asura. So strong. So ruthless. A genin. In front of the red-haired demon, he was like paper. Only then did Ryo lower his gaze to Kushina, who had fallen to the ground, tear streaks still on her small face, but her mouth agape in shock, having forgotten to cry. Tisk. He pursed his lips and walked over. Get up. His tone was still stiff, without any comforting gentleness. Ryo bent down, not gently but efficiently grabbing Kushina's arm, half lifting, half cradling her from the ground. Her knees clearly had scrapes, her hair was completely disheveled, covered in dust, and she looked utterly bedraggled. Kushina was still shaken. When Ryo pulled her up, she stumbled, instinctively wanting to throw herself into his arms for a sense of security, but was frozen in place by Ryo's intimidating aura that warned people to keep their distance. She could only let him hold her arm. Ryo frowned, looking at her state, especially her red, tear-stained eyes and the muddy streaks on her cheeks. Tisk. He clicked his tongue again, his impatience growing. Kushina's heart clenched, thinking he was going to scold her for causing trouble. But then Ryo, with a somewhat rough motion, raised his hand and used the inside of his own still clean sleeve to haphazardly wipe her still wet cheeks a couple of times. His movements were awkward, making Kushina feel a little pain, and dislodging a few undried grains of sand. But the dry, rough touch of the fabric, and Ryo's frowning yet genuinely wiping her face action, were like a faint but real spark of fire, unexpectedly piercing through the desperate, icy darkness in Kushina's heart. He hadn't abandoned her. He had beaten up that bad guy. And now, he was helping her wipe her face. Even if his technique was terrible. Grievance, fear, and a little inexplicable warmth mixed together, making her nose sting and her tear ducts threaten to burst again. Don't cry. Ryo immediately glared at her fiercely. You're too loud. But his voice unconsciously lowered a bit. Scolded by him, Kushina sniffled and actually managed to hold back her tears, leaving only a pair of wet, red, white eyes staring at him blankly and dependently. Ryo turned around and half-squatted in front of her. Get on. I'll take you home. His tone left no room for argument. Kushina froze, looking at the not-so-broad back in front of her, dressed in faded old clothes. Hurry up, Ryo urged impatiently. Kushina flinched at the shout, instinctively and clumsily climbed onto his back, her arms carefully wrapping around Ryo's neck. Her body was very light, but the moment she pressed against him, Ryo still frowned slightly. The soft, gentle feeling of a girl was unusually strange and awkward to him. Kushina carefully lay on his back, her two slender legs supported by his strong hands. As he stood upright, Kushina felt as if she was lifted from the ground by a solid force, and briefly lifted away from the terrifying nightmare she had just experienced. She gently pressed her hot cheek against the spot just above Ryo's nape, where the stubborn and messy roots of his red hair were. Which way? Ryo shifted her weight, his tone returning to its usual indifference. Turn left, go through 2 commercial streets, towards the old Senju clan compound, Kushina whispered, her voice thick with a nasal tone and the hoarseness of someone who had just escaped danger. Mitobachan's house. Ryo started walking, completely ignoring the onlookers still frozen in place. His pace was not fast, but very steady. The evening breeze ruffled Kushina's messy red hair, and also brushed against Ryo's neck. Kushina lay on his back, feeling the steady and slight jostling. The fear slowly receded, and a strange sense of security quietly crept into her heart. She hesitated, then bravely whispered, Ryo, are you very angry? Her voice was barely louder than a mosquito's, carrying careful tentativeness. Ryo's steps didn't falter. After a few seconds of silence, he grumbled in a muffled voice, it's fine. But that person, he seemed to say, he was, taught a lesson by you before. Kushina remembered Yamada's terrified expression when he saw him. Ryo snorted. Too much trash, who remembers which pit they crawled out of? That was indeed the case. Minor characters like Yamada, who only deserved one punch before being sent packing, held no place in his memory. Kushina fell silent. After walking for a while, the dim streetlights at the corner cast long shadows of the two of them. Kushina's voice softly rose again. Ryo, just now, when that person was pulling my hair, I said I hated red hair, it was out of anger. Her voice was a little urgent, wanting to explain clearly. I don't really hate it, I'm just so sad, they always say, tomato, that's why I. Ryo continued walking, not looking back, only tossing out a blunt reply. What's it to them? Can't even control their own mouths over someone else's hair. He paused, then seemed to think his words weren't harsh enough, adding fiercely, next time anyone dares to run their mouth, you tell them my name. If that doesn't work, just point them out to me after I wake up. These words were domineering and unreasonable to the extreme. But to Kushina's ears, they sounded like an indestructible form of protection. Grievance and unease surged again, but this time, she clung tightly to this unreasonable protection. She buried her face deeper into Ryo's clothes, which carried a faint scent of sweat and dust, and mumbled a muffled, On her cute little face, the corners of her mouth were secretly turned up. Neither of them spoke again. They walked past the brightly lit commercial street, the clamor of the crowd gradually fading away. Ryo, guided by Kushina's occasional pointers, entered a quiet area. Tall, traditional wooden houses were scattered about. This was the old Senju clan compound. Finally, they stopped in front of a heavy, ancient wooden door. Are we there? Ryo asked. Kushina softly replied, her voice mumbling and still carrying a cute nasal tone. Ryo's hand supporting her bent legs loosened slightly, preparing to squat down to let her off. Just then, with a creak, the door opened. The first to run out was Naoki. He seemed to have just returned home from training, yelling, "Sis! Have you seen my kunai pouch?" Before he could finish, his gaze passed over Tsunade, who had opened the door, and he froze at the doorway as if struck by lightning. In the last rays of the setting sun, the red-haired tyrant, Ryo, known throughout the school and whom Naoki himself tried to avoid, stood at their doorstep, carrying his family's new red-haired little sister, Kushina, on his back. Their posture was awkward yet somewhat, how to describe it? Strangely harmonious. Ryo's face, usually either irritable or indifferent, showed no expression. Kushina was nestled against his back, her small face still buried in his clothes, only revealing a bit of her flushed profile and messy red hair. Naoki's eyes instantly widened more than his kunai, his mouth agape enough to fit an egg. Clang! The water bottle he was holding dropped to the ground, making a crisp sound. The water sloshed out, spilling all over the doorstep. To be continued. Chapter 14. Meet the Senjus. The moment Ryo put down Kushina, he felt that the atmosphere was off. The heavy, ancient main gate of the Senju compound stood open, and people were standing behind the threshold. The last rays of the setting sun outlined the silhouettes of two young women. One tall and blonde, with a fiery figure, arms crossed over her chest, a hint of an inquisitive curve on her lips, and eyes like blades scanning between him and Kushina. It was Tsunade. The other had red hair tied in two buns, wearing an elegant kimono, with gentle and perceptive eyes, carrying a faint sense of relief. Uzumaki Mito. Naoki had just run out in a panic, yelling, "Sis," and the clang of a bottle hitting the ground intensified the tension. Naoki now stood with his mouth agape, eyes wide, staring intently at him and Kushina, who had just slid off his back. As soon as Kushina's feet touched the ground, the scrape on her knee twinged, and she instinctively hissed, swaying slightly, subconsciously grabbing Ryo's faded clothes. Tsunade's scrutinizing gaze, Mito's peaceful eyes, Naoki's idiotic expression, Kushina's action of grabbing his clothes, an invisible pressure permeated the air. He had never met Tsunade in person, only heard that she was a hot-tempered master. His instinct told him that this was big trouble. An uncomfortable feeling of being nailed to a display rack instantly seized him. Cough. Ryo abruptly pulled his clothes back, so quickly that he almost made Kushina stumble. He cleared his throat and spoke stiffly, "Kushina, you're home. I'll be going now." With that, he turned to slip away. Wait. Tsunade's voice wasn't loud, but it pinned him in place like a nail. She walked down the steps in a few strides, not looking at Ryo, but first carefully examining Kushina. Disheveled red hair, a small face streaked with dust and tears, torn pants, and a knee injury. Her brow furrowed almost imperceptibly, and then her gaze slowly returned to Ryo, with a sharp, assessing look as if evaluating something new. She had seen Ryo and Minato's fierce fight through a crystal ball that afternoon and had also heard the notorious reputation from Naoki's complaints. But now, this person was actually carrying Kushina back. This contrast made her very curious. "You're Ryo." Tsunade finally spoke, her voice calm but edged with curiosity. "Naoki keeps calling you a tyrant, but today I'm seeing another side of you. What's this, playing the knight in shining armor now?" Naoki behind them finally found his voice, stammering, "Sis. He's Ryo." The word tyrant caught in his throat, not daring to come out. Ryo was tense and rigid all over. Someone like Tsunade knew about his mess. And she was even looking at him as if judging him. "Don't know," Ryo muttered, shrugging. "Just some trash, I swept it up." Mito's gentle voice chimed in, "Tsunade, let the guest come in first. Ryo, you've worked hard." She looked at Kushina's knee with concern. Kushina is injured, healing her is the priority. Tsunade nodded, suppressing her questions, and turned to Ryo. Did you hear? Since you brought her back, lend a hand and help her in. She gestured toward the door. Ryo's heart pounded like a drum. Go in. Stay with Tsunade, Mito, and Naoki. For a first meeting in this strange atmosphere. No. Absolutely not. No need. I still have training. Kushina, see you tomorrow. Ryo quickly blurted out an excuse, his words like a chanted spell. Farewell. He turned and bolted, like an arrow shot from a bow, whooshing away in a gust of wind. Only the silhouette of the red-haired boy wildly running remained on the stone path. Tsunade was stunned for a moment, then burst into laughter. Ha! This kid runs faster than a rabbit. Naoki, didn't you say he was a calamity star? Why is he like this? Her laughter echoed through the neighborhood, with a hint of amusement. The contrast between rumor and reality was too interesting. Naoki was completely dumbfounded. Oh right. Was this still the fierce Ryo? Kushina stared blankly in Ryo's direction, her face confused. The warmth of being carried back was still there, but now mixed with a sense of loss. Why did he run? Alright, Tsunade put an arm around Kushina. Let's go in, girl, let your sister check your injury. She helped Kushina into the house. Naoki silently picked up the kettle and followed. In the living room, Mito sat quietly. Tsunade had Kushina sit down, and she herself knelt to examine the wound. It's a bad fall, but a minor issue. Green light glowed from her palm, yang nature chakra covered the injury, the bruise dissipated, and the wound scabbed over, leaving only a red mark. Try moving it. Kushina moved her legs and feet, surprised. It really doesn't hurt anymore. Thank you, Tsunade-san. Tsunade waved her hand. It's nothing. Then she lowered her voice, her eyes inquisitive. Kushina, that kid, didn't Naoki say he was fierce before? This is the first time I've seen him in person, and he's like a different person. Tell me, what happened? How did he end up carrying you? She was curious about the origin of this contrast. Naoki complained from the side, sis. He's a bully. Tsunade ignored him. Naoki always says he's unapproachable, but seeing him with you, are you two secretly dating? Tsunade teased. Kushina, you move quick, and I've got to admit, Ryo's a good-looking kid. Kushina's face flushed slightly, and she said flustered, no, nothing. Sister Tsunade, don't guess wildly. Images of fighting over meat and being protected in the alley flashed through her mind, both sweet and shy, so she buried her face and whispered, ah, don't ask. Tsunade noticed Kushina's ears turn red and her smile widened. Alright, I won't press. But it looks like our little Kushina's all grown up, huh? She gave Kushina's ear a playful tug, her curiosity about Ryo easing a bit at Kushina's reaction. Naoki turned his head and mumbled, the world is going to the dogs. Mito smiled as she looked out at the twilight, in the direction where Ryo had disappeared, her eyes growing increasingly relieved. The once stubborn red-haired boy had revealed a protective side in their reunion. To be continued. Chapter 15. Whetstone. Ryo almost sped back to his shabby house without his feet touching the ground. The door slammed shut behind him with a bang, shaking dust from the ceiling. He leaned back against the cold door, running a hand through his striking red hair, coarse and rough like dry grass. What the hell, he cursed under his breath. The scene at the Senju main house entrance replayed in his mind. Tsunade's scrutinizing gaze, Mito's all-knowing gentle smile, Naoki's idiotic face as if he'd seen a ghost, and Kushina's small gesture of tugging his clothes. That feeling was worse than being stripped naked and thrown into a marketplace. He roughly scrubbed his face, trying to suppress the inexplicable heat and an unidentifiable irritation. Wasn't it just carrying an injured little girl home? What's the big deal? The key was what? He actually ran away. This was completely not Kamiyama Ryo's style. Normally, he wouldn't even flinch at cracking the heads of classmates who dared disturb his sleep, yet this time, he'd run off in a panic. Humiliating. Too humiliating. The more Ryo thought about it, the more choked up he felt, a nameless fire rising in his chest. No, he had to vent. Grumble. Coinciding with his thoughts, his stomach let out a resounding protest. Hungry. A hunger more intense than after training instantly washed away all other thoughts. He also had to prepare for that little bandit Kushina's raid tomorrow. Ryo sighed. This little girl, once she latched on, she wouldn't let go. Ever since a piece of pork hawk started it last time, he felt like he'd boarded a pirate ship, automatically adding a few extra ounces of meat to his lunch every day. Trouble. He squeezed these two words through his teeth, but his hand dutifully grabbed the old cloth bag hanging in the corner and a katana with a slightly worn edge. No matter how troublesome, he couldn't starve himself. The night was inky black, carrying the unique chill of late autumn and the rusty smell of soil mixed with decaying leaves. Ryo, like a phantom merged with the night, silently scaled the outer wall of Konoha. The patrolling ninja squad remained completely unaware of his deliberately suppressed presence. He could find his way to the depths of the Forest of Death with his eyes closed. At night, the Forest of Death's danger level escalated exponentially. But for Ryo, this was his hunting ground, his refrigerator, and his training ground. The air was filled with a strong wild scent, and the glowing beast eyes in the darkness outnumbered the stars in the sky. His luck was good tonight. He didn't have to try too hard to encounter a lone adult wild boar. This fellow was fat and strong, with gleaming white tusks, very fierce, and an excellent source of energy. Swish. Ryo didn't use a sharpened wooden stick this time. With a flick of his wrist, the katana at his waist unsheathed with a faint hum. In the dim light, the blade reflected the cold moonlight, as intimidating as the sharp glint in his eyes. The wild boar roared and charged. Ryo stood firm, his feet unmoving. The instant the tusks were almost about to pierce his lower abdomen, his body slid sideways at an incredibly strange yet fluid angle, as if practiced 1,000 times. At the same time, the katana transformed into a white line, difficult to discern with the naked eye, slashing upward diagonally. Shing. A soft sound, like a sharp knife cutting through thick leather. A line of blood shot out into the air, carrying a scorching heat. The massive wild boar didn't even have time to let out a dying squeal before it slammed heavily to the ground, maintaining its charging posture. Its limbs twitched a few times, then it stopped moving. The entire hunt was swift, precise, and deadly. Ryo flicked off a few drops of hot blood from the tip of his blade and emotionlessly sheathed his sword. Only the smell of blood rapidly permeated the air. Just as he habitually dragged his prey, preparing to process it on the spot, an extremely subtle yet unusual sensation, like an ice needle piercing bone, suddenly shot up his spine to the back of his head. Not a beast. It was a human, carrying a hidden killing intent. In a flash of lightning, Ryo didn't even have time to fully turn around. Swish. A blade of water, carrying a fierce wind pressure, tore through the air without warning, precisely slicing toward the joint of his right arm, which was dragging the prey. The speed was incredible, the angle so tricky, definitely a master. Buzz. Ryo's body, driven by instinct, erupted with its maximum potential. The hand holding the sword moved almost at the same instant he perceived the danger. It wasn't a block, nor was it an evade. Instead, his body's center of gravity inexplicably sank, his arm muscles instantly tensed like steel cables, and he spun back fiercely, using the heavy wild boar corpse as leverage. Puff. A large chunk of the wild boar's hind leg was grazed and cut off by the water blade, splattering foul blood and taking what should have been a fatal blow for him. Damn it. Ryo cursed angrily, his internal alarm bells ringing wildly. This was an ambush. Where did this master come from? Could it be Danzo's old cunning root ninja? Or an enemy spy? He had no time to think. He pushed with his left hand, kicking away the obstructive wild boar carcass. His right hand unsheathed the katana with a clang, and he twisted like a predatory leopard, the cold blade tip pointing directly at the attacker's blurry figure. The moonlight fell sparingly, revealing the attacker dressed in standard Konoha Anbu attire, wearing a featureless animal mask. Only a pair of eyes, hidden in the shadows, were sharp as an owl's, coldly locked onto him. No words, no explanation. The Anbu flickered, charging forward again, even faster than before. This time it wasn't an ambush, but a full and frontal assault. He quickly formed hand seals, moving so fast that he left afterimages. Sweeten. Mizoripa water release. Wild water wave. Splash. A massive torrent of water seemed to be summoned from thin air, forming several high-speed swirling currents that fiercely crashed into Ryo. Ryo's pupils constricted. Instead of retreating, he advanced. The 30% combat experience inherited from Shanks erupted with brilliant light at this moment. He pushed off with his feet, creating a shallow pit in the ground, and charged head-on into the roaring water currents. A flash of sword light. So fast that only a flowing silver streak remained. Clang, 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 clang. The katana became an afterimage in Ryo's hands. Every slash, every block, precisely struck the core or weakest point of the water currents. The immense impact made his arm muscles bulge. Every collision caused his blood to churn, but his steps remained exceptionally steady. He forcefully shattered the Mizoripa, which could have sent an ordinary Chunin flying, inch by inch. Amidst the splashing water, Ryo's eyes grew brighter and brighter. A long-lost, exhilarating battle spirit burned in his chest. This pressure, this oppressive feeling, was exactly what he needed to break through his limit. Again, Ryo let out a suppressed growl from his throat, his battle intent boiling. He cast aside his initial surprise. Whoever you are, if you're going to throw yourself in my way, don't blame me for cutting you down to hone my edge. To be continued. Chapter 16. The mask comes off. The Anbu showed a flicker of surprise in his eyes, but his movements became even faster. Hand seals changed again. Sweeten. Sujinheki. Water release. Water formation wall. A thick, diamond-shaped water wall rose from the ground, blocking Ryo's sword strike. At the same time, several thinner, sharper arrows of water shot out silently from behind the wall, aiming straight at his vitals. Clang, clang, clang. Ryo's sword spun like a wheel, shredding every water arrow. At the same moment, he ducked low and lunged forward. The tip of his sword instantly pierced the core node of the water wall. Pop! With a crisp sound, the Sujinheki shattered into fragments of water. A slight frown appeared beneath the mask. The Anbu was clearly surprised that Ryo could so easily find the weakness of Suiten techniques. This wasn't just brute strength, it required sharp insight and combat intuition. He decisively changed strategy. No more Suiten, which consumed chakra and was proving ineffective. His body flickered as he switched to taijutsu. Fists, elbows, knees, and legs, every strike carried heavy wind pressure, forceful and vicious, each coming from cunning, unpredictable angles. Ryo met him head-on without flinching. With Shanks' battle experience fused into him, close quarters was exactly his territory. His katana chopped, hacked, parried, and thrust in sweeping arcs, while his fists and feet slipped in counterstrikes that came out of nowhere. There was no fixed pattern to his movements, only the wild unpredictability of a death match. Every impact rang out with a dull, powerful thud. In the forest, two figures fought at blistering speed, each clash stirring up gusts of wind, metal ringing, and a flurry of leaves scattering into the night. Bang! After blocking a heavy punch, Ryo seized the opening and whipped his leg around like a steel lash, striking the opponent's waist. The impact felt like kicking a steel ingot wrapped in rubber. Ah! The Anbu grunted, forced several steps back by the blow. Under the mask, his eyes widened slightly. This kid's strength, it's rising. The recoil left a subtle numbness in his waist and abdomen. Ryo, sensing the advantage, was about to press forward when suddenly, a profound, mystical sensation erupted deep inside him. It was like a dam finally cracking under floodwaters. In his mind, the system prompt that had been stuck at Shanks' legacy integration, 30% burst into radiant light. A cold, mechanical voice rang out. Host detected breaking through bottleneck under extreme pressure. Shanks' legacy integration increased to 30%. Legacy continues to unlock. Shanks' legacy unlocked to 60%. Shanks' legacy integration increased to 35%. Buzz. A torrent of power surged through his limbs and bones, vaster than ever before. Shanks' advanced combat wisdom, refined swordsmanship, mastery of haki and body control, all of it poured into his mind and muscle memory like a flood. It was like a metamorphosis from within, breaking free of a cocoon. Power surged, bones resonated, dormant cells rejoiced. Legacy unlocked. Current integration, 35%. Integration 30%. 60% corresponds to Joninkiage level potential. Ryo's movements stilled for a fraction of a second. His silver-gray eyes blazed brilliantly in the dark. So that's it. The bottleneck wasn't going to move with easy training. He needed this kind of brutal, life-or-death pressure. So, you were a big help. Ryo's lips curved into a grin filled with fighting spirit and a touch of bloodlust. His voice was low but sharp with excitement. Thanks. This time, he charged first. His movements turned crisp, fluid, and lethal. Every step was ghost-like. The katana in his hand was no longer clumsy hacking, it now carried an indescribable spirit and weight. The sword had become part of his body. The Anbu immediately sensed the difference. Ryo's speed, strength, technique, and even aura all surged to a new level. If before, he could maintain a slight edge with experience and stronger chakra, now a crushing pressure pressed down on him. It was as if his opponent was no longer a child, but a veteran swordsman forged through 1,000 battles. They clashed again, but the tide had shifted. Ryo's swordsmanship grew sharper, each strike carrying an invisible cutting edge that tore the air with piercing shrieks. Even stray leaves were sliced apart by the passing blade. Bang! After another fierce collision, the Anbu retreated with the force, then clapped his hands and aimed toward a hanging waterfall nearby. Suiten, Suiryuden no Jutsu. Water release, water dragon bullet technique. Boom! A deafening roar shook the forest. The waterfall surged as if seized by an unseen giant hand, forming into a massive, ferocious water dragon that barreled forward, jaws wide with crushing force. Even before it reached him, the gale whipped at Ryo's face. His eyes lit up. He didn't retreat. He stepped forward instead, katana raised high. His arms swelled with explosive strength. Slash. Buzz. The blade cut an arc brighter than moonlight, tearing the air itself apart. A visible crescent-shaped shockwave erupted from the swing. No ornamentation, no tricks, just pure cutting intent. Chhhh. The shockwave sliced through the massive water dragon like tofu. The dragon exploded into a downpour of scattered rain. The slash didn't stop. It tore into the ground behind the Anbu. Rumble. Dirt and stone blasted apart. A trench several feet deep and 10 meters long appeared in the darkness. The Anbu's pupils shrank beneath the mask. Ryo's chest surged with battle spirit, ready to press the advantage, squeezing every drop of value out of this opponent. But then, the flood of newly integrated power abruptly cooled. An overwhelming wave of fatigue and weakness crashed through his body. The intense limit breakthrough in battle had wrung out every ounce of strength. The arm holding his katana trembled with soreness, each breath burned in his chest, his legs felt like lead, and even standing upright was a struggle. He braced himself with the tip of his sword, panting heavily, sweat dripping down his face. Damn it. 8-year-old body really can't handle this. He cursed inwardly. The strain had completely drained his still developing body. The power was real, but his body needed time to adapt. Rain fell, soaking his hair, blurring his vision. The forest lay in ruins, the only sounds the rushing waterfall and his ragged breathing. The Anbu stood not far away, watching him through the rain. There were signs of exhaustion as well, his uniform torn from the backlash of his own sweetened techniques. Bang! A puff of white smoke burst out. The Anbu vanished. In his place stood a tall woman. Golden hair glistened in the moonlight, clinging to her temples and slender neck. Her soaked uniform outlined a strong, curving figure. Her striking face carried the lingering sharpness of battle. It was none other than the princess of Konoha, Senju Tsunade, the same woman Ryo had been desperately trying to avoid earlier. Ryo's head snapped up, his mind buzzing at the sight. Tsunade. Absurdity and irritation spiked through him. He had come into the forest to blow off steam, specifically to avoid her and the circus-like atmosphere around her. And instead, he got nearly beaten to death by her. Ha 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 ha. Tsunade let out an unrestrained laugh, echoing through the wrecked forest, startling a few night birds. Kid. She strode forward, a mischievous grin on her beautiful face, drawing out her words. Didn't expect it was me, did you? Fun fight. To be continued. Chapter 17. Aftermath bonus. Thanks so much for your support with the Power Stones. Here's the bonus chapter for hitting 100 PS, next bonus at 200 PS. Also, a little side event. We're currently at 4 reviews. If we can reach 10 reviews, I'll drop 2 extra bonus chapters as well. Enjoy the read XD. Hollow Diamond, Hollow Diamond, Hollow Diamond, Hollow Diamond. Ryo silently looked at the smiling face in front of him, then at the deep, long trench his slash had carved into the ground, and the wild boar carcass in the distance with half its hind leg cut off. A heavy sense of bewilderment washed over him. What is this supposed to mean? Just because I did not go to the Senju house for tea, you disguised yourself as Anbu, chased me into the forest of death, and taught me a lesson. Is her brain wired wrong? Ryo felt a herd of curses stampeding through his chest, but only squeezed out a dry line, Tsunadesima. Tsunade seemed to completely miss the storm in his chest, or rather, she caught it and did not care. She ignored the curves traced by her drenched combat uniform as she walked a few steps to stand before Ryo. She looked down at him, but her eyes were much gentler than during the fight, carrying the pickiness of someone satisfied with an inspection. What? Cat got your tongue? She raised an eyebrow. A soft green light bloomed at her fingertips as she pressed precisely on his shoulder and arm grazed by a water blade. Warm life energy poured in, and the small wounds visibly closed and scabbed. His sore, weak muscles felt as if a warm current had been injected, and his fatigue quickly receded. Ryo's body recognized the technique at once, a rank ninjutsu, Shozen Jutsu, mystical palm technique. His tensed muscles relaxed a little on their own, but his guard and confusion did not drop at all. Tisk. Not badly injured, just too much consumption. This small body is still a bit weak. Tsunade finished the treatment, withdrew her hand, and patted it clean. Her movements were swift and decisive. Do not look at me like that, kid. She finally put away her mischievous smile, though a hint of teasing still lingered in her eyes. You think I am so bored I ran over here just to beat you up and vent? Ryo pursed his lips and stared at her in silence. The meaning in his eyes was clear. Otherwise. Phew. Tsunade wiped the rain from her face, then jerked her thumb at the boar carcass lying behind them. Let's get this big guy back. I'm starving, and that fight took more out of me than I expected. Her words carried the casual authority of someone used to giving orders, but there was no real malice in them, just straightforward bluntness. Ryo. She raised a brow when he didn't immediately move. Well, the rain's not letting up anytime soon. You planning to stand here until we're both drenched? Ryo took a steady breath, suppressing the urge to argue. He wasn't in top shape, and the last thing he needed was a drawn-out spat with a woman like Tsunade. Better to save his strength for something that actually mattered. He stood up, forced down his body's protests, walked to the boar carcass, and hefted it up roughly. Tsunade, meanwhile, casually carried the severed hind leg as if it weighed nothing. She glanced at Ryo's strained movements, said nothing, and only raised her chin to indicate, lead the way. Rain washed the forest path, leaving behind two silent sets of footprints. Ryo carried the heavy boar, each step stamping deep into the mud. The exhaustion in his body had been eased greatly by Tsunade's treatment, but the questions and frustration in his chest snowballed. By the time they returned to his dilapidated house on the village outskirts, as simple as a shack, the rain had just stopped. Ryo swung the boar off his shoulder with a clang onto the big bluestone in the yard that served as his chopping block, splashing mud and water. He reversed his grip and stabbed the chipped, broken sword into the ground, then pushed open the creaking wooden door without a word. Tsunade followed closely and walked in without ceremony. The house was extremely simple, with almost no furniture. The most eye-catching things were a huge seasoning box, releasing all kinds of spice aromas, and a pile of homemade long meat skewers and baskets of smoked meat by the wall. The air was full of firewood, dust, and spices. It was not pleasant, but for Ryo at that moment, it was the only place he could breathe. Though his safe haven had just been invaded. Tisk, poorer than I thought. Tsunade looked around without restraint, her gaze sweeping over a few yellowed ninja scrolls in the corner, then landing on the large seasoning box and the neatly stacked leaf-wrapped bundles beside it. But you are pretty well equipped. Ryo ignored her. He scooped a ladle of cold water from a chipped ceramic jar in the corner, tilted his head back, and gulped it down. Water slid down his increasingly defined jawline, washing off a trace of his ragged look. The cold water pressed down the burn in his throat and the agitation in his chest. He wiped his mouth, did not bother with greetings, and went straight to the big bluestone in the yard. Konoha's night went quiet again. Only the whistle of a blade through air and heavy chopping thuds broke the silence. Moonlight slipped out from behind the clouds, illuminating the focused redhead in the yard. Ryo rolled up his sleeves, revealing the clean muscle lines on his forearms. Young, but full of power. The thick-backed cleaver felt weightless in his hands, driven with brutal efficiency. Swish, swish, swish. The blade flashed in the moonlight, flowing like water. Thick hindquarter meat. A swift chop, clean decomposition into steady chunks, the crisp sound of bone separating from meat sharp and clear. Tough fassa was as fragile as paper under his knife. Ribs with tender meat. A precise slicing cut along the bone seam, the tip prying and turning, and evenly thick, snowflake-patterned slices scattered like petals into the rough ceramic basin. Lean leg meat. Thin slices. The blade ran along the grain, each slice translucent and almost identical in size. Tenderloin. Large cut. The knife swept in an arc to remove a complete strip. Separating tendons. Deboning. Trimming fassa. His movements were swift, precise, and dominant, every detail showing the skill of a seasoned butcher and a self-contained violent meat aesthetic. The boar's massive body was systematically disassembled under his orderly hands, not an ounce wasted. Sweat trickled from his forehead onto the cold stone slab. He did not seem to notice, his eyes fixed on the mountain of meat. Tsunade leaned against the doorframe with her arms crossed, watching. The scrutiny and playfulness in her gaze gradually faded, replaced by growing surprise and focus. This kid's knife work, it is not just strength and speed. It is eyesight, prediction, and instinct in his bones, honed across countless cuts. This is not cooking at all. It is another form of combat artistry. The focus and confidence coming off his movements were more condensed and pure than many sword masters she had seen. This kid had a terrifying sense of control. When Ryo picked up the large ceramic basin, poured in a generous amount of coarse salt over the mountain of tender slices, then scattered dried chili flakes and various spice powders, and finally drizzled shimmering animal fat and thick miso, the dominant yet complex spicy aroma burst out at once. Then he slipped on thick gloves, made from bark and vines, and got to work. Slap, slap, slap. His powerful hands plunged into the meat, kneading, squeezing, and grabbing. Every motion carried raw power, making sure every piece was tightly coated with the thick spices and oil. The air began to fill with a rich, mouthwatering aroma. To be continued. Chapter 18. Appreciation. This smell, Tsunade twitched her nose, her throat moving involuntarily. This simple, rough pickling method produced a domineering aroma that slammed straight into her appetite. Ryo stayed in rhythm, roughly wrapping and pressing the kneaded slices of meat tight with large, clean leaves, then weighing them down with big stones. The remaining strips of meat he salted evenly and hung aside. His hands moved so fast they dazzled the eye. After handling the raw meat, Ryo set up the old scrap-iron pot that could boil a whole pig, filled it with water, and tossed in a few smashed wild boar leg bones and meat scraps. He then slipped into the small woods beside the house and, in a blink, returned with a handful of wild spring onions still beaded with dew, some old ginger, a few unknown wild fruits, and a cluster of umbrella-shaped wild mushrooms, which he tore and dropped into the pot. A big flame leapt up. Gurgle, gurgle. Soon, steam carrying rich bone aroma, the sharp bite of wild spring onions, and the earthy fragrance of mushrooms pushed back against the dominating spice of grilled meat, rising in wisps straight into their noses. Tsunade finally straightened and paced over to the simple barbecue grill in the corner. The freshlit charcoal crackled softly. She picked up two nearly 2-meter-long homemade skewers and, with fluid ease, threaded thick-cut ribs and large slices of leg meat onto them. Her technique was as natural as picking up a kunai. Ryo glanced at her, said nothing, and accepted the help. All his focus was on filling the yawning emptiness left by being drained. Thick cuts sizzled as the flames licked them. Hot fat dripped onto the red charcoal, flaring into bluish-white tongues of fire. Sizzle. Ryo took several deep breaths of the supercharged aroma flooding the yard, the char of grilled meat, the mellow stew, heavy wood smoke, pungent marinade. His exhausted spirit felt like it had been hit with a strong stimulant. His eyes brightened, and the subtle soreness in his muscles seemed to ease under the assault of scent. He fed the fire, turned the meat, and tasted the soup for salt. His hands were fast, precise, and steady, and a serious gourmet's aura settled over him. When the first golden piece of grilled meat was torn off, blown on, and popped into his mouth, the crisp outside, tender inside, erupting juices, and bone-deep spice made him narrow his eyes in satisfaction. A low, contented sound rumbled in his throat. Tsunade was even faster. She grabbed a perfectly grilled slice of leg meat, ignored the heat, and bit in. Her eyes lit up. Rich juices and spice exploded across her tongue. The chew, paired with that domineering, layered flavor, was simple, primal, and completely satisfying. TCH. Kid, you've got real skill. She unceremoniously grabbed a few more of the largest pieces, eating with oil on her lips, hearty as a tomboy. Ryo, while shoveling calories into the void in his gut, neatly laid more raw slices onto the preheated stone slab. The hiss of fat on hot stone, mixed with their chewing and swallowing, became the most harmonious music of the moment. Tsunade cleared her plate like a whirlwind, then, still unsatisfied, turned to the extra-large bamboo bento box Ryo was portioning. Watching him neatly layer the enticing slices, even picking out the best thick-cut chops to place on top before covering it with the big bamboo lid, she noted the amount was clearly more than a single serving. Hey! A sly smile crept onto her lips. What's with the extra? You cooking for an army? Ryo's hand paused on the lid. His reply was flat, stockpile. His hand, however, pulled the box closer. That alone answered. Tsunade's smile lingered, but she let it drop. She walked to the stove and saw the milky white bone broth rolling with steam, its rich scent hitting her straight on. This soup looks good too. She picked up a big, chipped sea bowl beside the stove and ladled it full without ceremony. Bones, wild spring onion segments, and mushrooms soaked in broth settled into the steaming bowl. Hey! Ryo's voice cut. Tsunade ignored him, blew on the rim, and took a heavy gulp. Phew, hot, hot. The soup slid down her throat, warmth followed by rich, melted depth. The heavy bone aroma, mellow oil, sharp green freshness, wild mushroom umami, and a subtle sweet aftertaste from the wild fruits all popped in layers across her tongue. A comfortable warmth spread from her stomach to her limbs. Ha! Refreshing. Tsunade wiped her mouth, heat and satisfaction tinting her face. Lady Tsunade. Ryo's expression didn't shift much, but a vein ticked at his temple. You came here to eat me dry and chatter like an old hag. That's the serious business. Tsunade chuckled at his irritation. She finished the last sip of soup and set the bowl on the stove with a crisp clack. All right, enough jokes. She straightened, expression turning steady. I did come with reason. Ryo stared at her, waiting. First, I am here to thank you. Tsunade raised a slender finger at him, her tone firm. Tonight, you brought Kushina home safely, and kept those brainless idiots from stepping on her again. You were quite heavy-handed, but as her sister, I appreciate the protection. To be continued. Chapter 19. Thanks. Bonus. So you chased me out here and beat me up as a thank you. Ryo finally could not hold it in. His voice was edged with anger and absurdity, almost a roar. He pointed at his mud-soaked clothes. You beat me from one end of the forest to the other and nearly had me swallowed by a water dragon. Is this how you say thank you? Right. What else? Tsunade raised an eyebrow, so righteous it made one want to spit blood. Beat you, make you work, sweat a little. Is that not the most practical? Do you want me to bring you tea, bow, and say, thank you? She sneered. Empty talk. A fight stretches your muscles, loosens your body. Didn't you notice how much sharper your movements got after the spar? She raised her chin, referring to Ryo's integration increase during the battle, eyes slightly teasing. What? My thank you gift was not hard enough. Not exciting enough. Ryo almost laughed at the nonsense. All right then. Thanks for the heartfelt thanks. He let the sarcasm bite. Second, I am testing you. Tsunade's voice turned serious. It is no coincidence you can dominate the Ninja Academy. That thank you gift was enough for me to measure your weight. The result. Ryo met her gaze, cold and steady. He did not need compliments. He wanted to know her aim. So. Tsunade gave a neutral verdict, tone flat, eyes sharp. Your hard power is enough. Thick skin and raw strength. Your fighting style is rough, but there is real substance in your core. Those flexible sword moves do not look like something a brat should have, which is interesting. If I am not mistaken, you are barely passable, stuck at the threshold of Jonin. She paused, emphasizing, pay attention, barely. Your only edge is being tough and strong. She took 2 steps and met Ryo's stubborn gaze. Your swordsmanship looks crude, but it is blended with a fierce intuition honed through life and death fights. There is also a kind of tisk, hard to describe, like the intent, that only a veteran soaked in the sword for decades can possess. It is still vague, like a bud. Boy, who taught you? The last question, probing and scrutinizing, went straight to the core. Her eyesight was vicious. Even if Shanks' experience was only integrated to 35%, that instinctive intent and flexible skill, forged by top masters, had begun to show. No one taught me. He sidestepped, voice cold and hard. I figured it out. After chopping pigs enough times, it came naturally. Hey. Tsunade was unconvinced, but she did not press. She snorted. Fine, I will treat you as a rare talent among wild butchers. But, she shifted without giving room to argue, you only have stone-like strength and the reckless charge of a boar. Without someone to sharpen the diamond, you only become a better whetstone. You think you are strong. Not even close. If all you know is fighting, you will end up as emotionless fodder for Danzo. At the mention of Danzo, a cold light flashed in Ryo's eyes. Kid, Tsunade walked up, close enough to see his bristling red hair. Someone thinks you are good material and wants me to take you as my apprentice and point you the right way. She leaned in slightly, pressure settling. Do you know who? An image flashed in Ryo's mind, an old pervert with a crystal ball peeping in the office. Hokage. That is right. Sarutobi Hiruzen has taken a liking to you. He thinks you can inherit his will of fire. Tsunade straightened, a hint of teasing and pride in her tone. However, if you want to be my disciple, the old man's recommendation and your bit of brute force are not enough. She raised 2 fingers, passing sentence. First, meeting the power requirement is your ticket. That exam was the entry ticket. You barely qualify for a second look. The second, and most important, Rule. Tsunade's eyes turned needle-sharp, her voice dropping with unquestionable weight. Your temper, character, and mindset must pass with me. If you are a disciple who does not suit my taste, whether recommended by Sarutobi Hiruzen or the son of the Rakudo Sennin, get out. In Konoha, no one could force Tsunade to accept someone she did not approve of. Ryo stood there, wet clothes clinging, silent as stone. He looked at Tsunade, digesting it. Hiruzen had high hopes and wanted to push him toward a bright path. Danzo coveted him and wanted to drag him into route. Danger and opportunity, together. So, Ryo said, his voice back to its usual coldness. Anger faded. You came tonight to beat me as thanks and to test my strength. The Hokage asked you to take me as your apprentice. You felt I was, barely, qualified, so you decided to observe first. Your little brain is sharp. Tsunade grinned with a hint of malicious admiration. Half right. Besides what the old man said, there is Kushina. She brought up Kushina again, eyes full of meaning. That little girl treats you, ahem. Anyway, for Kushina's sake, I am giving you more, testing. Otherwise, do you think your crude sword and brute strength are worth me running through the forest of death at night and getting soaked? The corner of Ryo's mouth twitched. Tsunade did not seem to notice his displeasure. She waved the meat in her hand and jumped topics like a shunshin. Alright, reasons explained. This meat is my medical fee. Medical fee. Ryo's tone sharpened, his eyes cutting to a piece of pork neck and the best leg meat she was lifting. His forehead vein twitched. He jabbed a finger at the creaking door. The door's there. I've had enough talk. I still need to train. Tsunade paused, studying his face, then smirked. Ha ha ha. Fine, fine. I'll go. She knew her, thanks, and, test, logic was, unique. Goal achieved. Time to leave. She turned, scooped up the meat, and strode off. Under the moonlight, her back was crisp and neat. Bang. The wooden door slammed shut with a heavy thud, echoed by the earth wall. To be continued. Chapter 20. Hiruzen's Plant Bonus. Bonus for 10 reviews is promised, thanks for your support with PS, 2. More bonus for that coming soon. I know some of you feel the MC is being a bit too passive around Tsunade right now, but that's only temporary. At this stage, he simply doesn't have the power to push back, but the tables will turn soon. XD. And as you might have noticed, while there will be lots of action in a while, it's also a bit slice of life oriented, so if you don't mind that, read on. Thanks for your support once again. In the dead of night, the Hokage office was dimly lit and filled with smoke. Sarutobi Hiruzen, a pipe clamped between his fingers, was frowning at a scroll when the door groaned under an unbearable force and was kicked open with a clang. The spark in the pipe jumped in surprise. Tsunade strode in, bringing with her a strong aroma of meat and the chill of a dewy night. In her left hand, she held a large, dark brown, glistening pork neck, stained with a few dried leaves. Thick sauce slowly dripped between her fingers. In her right hand, she casually clutched a scroll, its edge still smudged with dark red marks. The Anbu on duty in the shadows by the door, intimidated by her violence, instinctively tensed as she passed. Old man. Tsunade walked straight to the desk, her voice booming. With a pat, she threw the glistening roasted pork neck onto Hiruzen's document-strewn desk. The savory aroma instantly overpowered the smell of tobacco. Still up this late? Hiruzen's gaze lifted from the well-worn pork to Tsunade's slightly disheveled outfit, its corners stained with grass and wet mud, then to her greasy, possibly blood-stained hands. His brows furrowed almost imperceptibly. Oh. Coming to see me with such a grand display, what is it, and this? Ryo. Kamiyama Ryo. Tsunade wiped her mouth, as if still savoring the charred and tender aroma. I just finished testing that kid. Her tone carried post-battle satisfaction. Satisfied. Very satisfied. From now on, he is my official first disciple. I came specifically to let you know. She did not shy away, explaining in a few words how she had a sudden whim to test the mettle of the guy Kushina and Nawaki had been talking about, how she disguised herself as Anbu to ambush him in the forest of death, how she used the kid as a punching bag until he broke his limits, and how she was thanked, only to be conquered by his superb barbecue skills. Hiruzen listened in silence, his pipe almost slipping from his hand. He took a deep puff, choked, and his mouth twitched slightly. Cough. So, you call this an assessment? He looked deeply at his disciple, his gaze a mix of empathy for his own teacher's headaches back then and helpless amusement. Tsunade, your method of thanking someone when taking them as a student is a bit, cough. He gestured at Tsunade with the stem of his pipe. Unusual. What is wrong with unusual? As long as it is effective. Tsunade tossed her golden hair, righteous. Isn't the effect good? That kid is tough, perfect for grinding down his wildness. Besides, she patted the scroll stained with dark red, didn't I pull him back into the light for you? To keep him from being coveted by certain roots in the gutters. She hinted at something, then yawned, signaling the end of the topic. Alright, I've taken him on. That is settled. If there is nothing else, I am leaving. Good. I understand. Hiruzen immediately caught the deeper meaning in her words, a sharp light flashing in his eyes. He responded decisively, genuine relief on his face. His fingers imperceptibly tapped his pipe. Ryo joining the Hokage lineage, becoming his grand disciple. Kushina and Ryo's bond deepening daily, almost intertwined, and Kushina being the future Kyuubi Jinchuriki. These three lines instantly braided into a clear, strong rope in his mind, held firmly in the Hokage's hand. A trace of ease and the pleasure of holding the overall situation flashed in his eyes. Tsunade saw his expression and knew the old man was once again calculating his intricate game. She said no more, too lazy to bother with the twists and turns, and picked up the pig's trotter on the table that had witnessed her sincerity. I am off. She turned like a gust of wind. The office door groaned again, and her golden-haired figure disappeared down the corridor. Hiruzen watched her leave, and once the door closed, the relief on his face instantly receded, replaced by his usual deep calm. Smoke once again permeated the air. An Anbu wearing an animal mask silently knelt before the desk, as if emerging from the shadows. Go. The third's voice was low and authoritative, carrying undeniable power. Inform Danzo. Tsunade has personally confirmed taking Ryo as her direct disciple, and from today, Ryo is her only direct disciple. He paused, emphasizing his words. Warn him. Put away any improper thoughts. No one is to scheme against Ryo again. No one. Understood, Hokage-sama. Comma. Bang. A delicate celadon teacup shattered into pieces in the depths of Ni's secret base. Danzo's grim face twisted and monstrous like a demon in the flickering candlelight. He clutched the small scroll just delivered from the Hokage tower, his knuckles white, a chilling cold and fury seeping from his bones. Sa, Ru, Tu, Bai, Hai, Ru, Zen, a hoarse voice, like sandpaper rubbing dry bone, squeezed out word by word from between his clenched teeth. Every word on that paper was like a red-hot brand, searing his heart. Tsunade taking a disciple, Ryo becoming part of the Hokage line, the warning. Every line declared his failure. The promising talent he had set his eyes on, that sharp blade that could tear through enemies and stain Konoha's foundations in the future, had been snatched away. Bang! Another furious punch slammed into the hard ebony desk, the dull thud shaking dust from the ceiling. His eyes seemed to burn, bloodshot and bulging, staring fixedly at the scroll, threads of red crazily crawling across his eyeballs. This was not just losing a potential new talent. It was a blatant slap and suppression. The third Hokage was using the name of Tsunade and her disciple to pin down Danzo and the entire sphere of root. Hey, hee, at the peak of rage, he laughed instead, his mouth twisting upward into a strange, chilling arc that could stop a child's crying. Hiruzen. Tsunade. The firelight danced on his distorted face. His sinister gaze pierced the shadowed rock walls, fixed in the direction of the Hokage tower. You want it all. Good. His voice was as soft as a snake's hiss, yet it carried a coldness that seeped into every blue brick of the basement. Just wait and see. Whether it is the Kyuubi Jinchuriki, or that sharp blade. You may hold them for a while, but can you hold them for a lifetime? To be continued.